businesses and their interests at the highest levels. Their International Chamber of Commerce publications are fabulous resources that I use, as well as others. This year, they are also the chair of the Business 7, bringing a voice to Canadian businesses at the G7. Please join me in welcoming Gaffel.
Okay. Well, thanks so much, Victoria, the Africa Desk team, and everyone else in attendance here today. So I don't think I'll take very long because I know we have a full day of programming with people that are much more deep and penetrating insights into trade diversification than I do. But I think what might be helpful as a scene setter maybe is to outline some of the business priorities that we're hearing about and that our members are concerned about with regards to trade and trade diversification. So if this works. Okay, so maybe to start off, I'll briefly touch on Canada-US trade and current events on the Canada-US trade front. Obviously, I think you guys are all following the developments very carefully. From a business standpoint, this probably is the biggest and most pressing issue for Canadian businesses, simply because of the size of the Canada-US trading relationship and also how integrated the Canada-US supply chains are. So from a business standpoint, Canada-US trade, obviously top of mind for everyone. And the sort of the biggest part of that, I think, that is again and again coming up in our discussions is the Trump administration and its current trade policies. Highly unpredictable, challenging, and starting as early as Inauguration Day and January of this year, we've seen a series of varying, unpredictable, at times contradictory trade measures that have been very difficult for businesses to navigate. So as early as January 21st, we saw a delay of the initial promise for day one tariffs on Canada and Mexico, that being pushed out until February 1st, again delayed until March, and now delayed with some stipulations due to expire today, actually. So a series of pretty difficult trade measures, simultaneously varying different other types of tariffs as well, oftentimes stacking, not always clear how they interact with each other. So obviously tariffs on steel and aluminum in the ensuing months, autos, and discussion of tariffs on semiconductors and agricultural products, a whole host of products that will hugely impact Canadian industry. That brings us to April of this year. So today, we're expecting the next big tariff announcement with the reciprocal tariffs that are due to be announced at 4 p.m. today from Washington, D.C. So again, the shape and the implementation of these tariffs is still entirely unclear. We've heard that there may be a flat tariff rate that applies to all countries, that there may be a list of target countries that are specifically singled out, and also that there may be what you might consider concentric rings of tariffs, where you have people within the one tier having the highest rate of tariffs, whereas others in other tiers having lower rates. So all of that's still quite unclear, and it's surprising and really quite shocking that a day prior to implementation we wouldn't know any of this. But the reporting coming out of DC is contradictory even still. So it's very likely that we won't know what is coming up until 4 p.m. today when the president announces his plans. So obviously watching that extremely carefully from a business standpoint. The product of all this uncertainty and new measures and conflicting measures is an unprecedented level of economic policy uncertainty. A rate that is higher than we experienced during COVID, during Brexit, the Eurozone debt crisis, global financial crisis, and really ever. So obviously, around the world, everyone sort of is impacted in a very similar way. No one really is quite sure how to respond to the tariffs, and from a business standpoint, that's created a ton of uncertainty around investments, business operations, and priorities. And even from a policy standpoint, businesses aren't quite sure how to respond. So we're looking to, from the Canadian Chamber's point of view, we're always looking to minimize this level of uncertainty, but with the Trump administration, that's extremely difficult to do. The impacts of the tariffs, though, I think, they're having real effects on Canada. And at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, one thing we've done is quantify as best as we can some of the impacts that these tariffs might have on Canada's major cities, for example. And I think this is a helpful way to visualize the way in which our current trade arrangement with the United States leaves us vulnerable to potential tariff risks. So you'll see certain cities like St. John's and Calgary, Windsor as well. These are highly U.S. trade exposed cities. So it'll be very interesting to see what comes in the coming weeks. Turning over very quickly to the opportunities now, EDC has sort of laid out this analysis, which I think is quite helpful in visualizing what opportunities exist. So here you'll see a projection of potential exports in 2030. There's hidden gems identified here in this visualization, but you can sort of see at a high level that although the U.S. remains a hugely important market, there's opportunities elsewhere as well, including in South America, Africa, Asia. And I'm sure today we'll get into much deeper discussion as to what exactly those opportunities are. Our chief economist at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce has also done some analysis on the universe of firms that exist in Canada and their trading potential. You'll see here it sort of captures in a very intuitive way that of the current set of firms we have in Canada, there's a huge amount that are potential traders that could be utilizing international trade more effectively. So more to capitalize there with regard to trade diversification as well. So if I can wrap up really quickly, just thought I'd maybe turn over now to some of the Chamber's efforts in responding to all of these events as of late. So you'll see here our senior executives in Washington, D.C. As I mentioned, the United States remains a key market for us. So we had senior executives on the ground on Inauguration Day in D.C. And an ongoing priority for us has been reinforcing North American trade relations. So in spite of the current tariff difficulties, the U.S. remains a top market, and for businesses remains a top priority. So we've been engaging with government officials, partners on the ground, so the White House, think tanks, various government departments, and doing our best to reinforce the trade linkages that exist between Canada and the United States. Simultaneously, we're also taking steps to build ties with new markets to respond to the challenges we're facing currently. So Japan, for instance, is a key market for Canada, and just earlier this year, we hosted the Japanese Chamber of Commerce and Industry for discussions and some opportunities to deepen linkages. So again, building ties to key markets also a top priority, and there's other geographic areas that we're also working on. To sum up, I think an unprecedented level of trade uncertainty, which is highly disruptive for businesses. That being said, opportunities there as well. There's a strong amount of business and political interest in diversifying trade that I think we could be capitalizing on in a more significant way. The U.S. and North America remain key major priorities for businesses, so we're hopeful that the current challenges will subside and we'll have better relations there. And finally, that businesses are playing a pretty active role in shaping these outcomes. So through the Chamber, through organizations like this one and events like this, there's many opportunities to deepen ties and affect change. So thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Susan. Susan Amanda. Before I thank you, for which you've done a great job, I just want to say I'm thrilled to see everybody. What a good day to be out talking trade on a day like today. I think before we even planned this day, something cosmically was happening about this day. So that we are here talking about trade on a day like today is really amazing. And everybody looks amazing. I'm done. Gaffo, thank you so much. Thank you so much for that insightful presentation. And I want to say that I'm sure if you're like me, your wheels are churning, and there's a lot of information you have downloaded for us. There will be an opportunity to have some questions for him, and I'm hoping that we can all smile. Everybody put on your good smile so that he can share the slides. We might be able to get him to share some of the slides for people like me who do not write quickly, who cannot take it all in. Now, no pressure, Gaffo. If you can't, you can't. But if you can, we'll take them, and then we'll share them. But everybody, sharpen your questions. Now, it's my pleasure this afternoon to welcome Gareth. Now, if there's anybody in the room who doesn't know Gareth, you're in for a treat. He's going to help us to follow up and take the first panel. He's going to introduce his panelists, and he's going to moderate us through the questions for the first panel. And Gaffo, and if we like how he does, we can talk to him even after that. So he's under pressure to perform. Now, Gareth has many things. I'm just gonna say he's my friend, and he is good at the Canada-Africa Chamber of Business. For as long as I know Gareth, he's always talking about Canada and Africa and trade, and he's a beautiful communicator, or handsome communicator, however way you want to take that, but he's a very good communicator. And if I try to read his bio, I'll take up the time for the panel. So Gareth, please come up and introduce your panel and take it away.
Thank you so great to see you. Sorry, get back. Well, thank you very much, Susan, and it's been amazing to walk the road with the Africa Trade Desk. The last time we were together like this, I know, was in Kenya, and we've been all across the continent, across this great country that we call home. I felt a lot of pressure with that intro, but then I realized a great panel is made up by great panelists, and so I'm absolutely honored to moderate the session today as we kick off with the title for Panel 1, The World Trades, welcoming to the stage 3 key individuals in this regard. And so as I welcome each of our panelists, I invite you to take your seats. We'll begin the panel session with an introduction and some slides behind me, after which we'll have an opportunity all together to engage. Vina Najibullah, Vice President of the Asia Pacific Foundation, I welcome you to come and join us up on stage, followed by Jacqueline Marquez Ojano, President of the Foreign Investment and Trade Mexico-Canada, as well as Benjamin Ibela, who I just met today for the first time, Trade Commissioner for Inclusive Trade at Global Affairs Canada. I invite each one of you to come and take your seats up front, and a warm welcome for kicking us off today with the first insightful panel. Thank you so much, Jacqueline. Thank you, Ben. And what I'm going to do is, just in terms of the context, of course, trade diversification has been a key issue for a long time now. And what I love about each one of you is that you've been living out trade diversification as a principle instead of as a reaction, perhaps, to some of the more contemporary events that we've just seen outlined. And so I'd like to introduce Jacqueline first to take us through the relationship with Canada and Mexico. Jacqueline is founder of FITMC, the consulting firm that's been established here in Ottawa, specializing in enhancing trade and investment between both Mexico and Canada. And that includes the adoption of a comprehensive, focused, and specialized vision. I know your background in law has been incredibly helpful, particularly in understanding investment, one of your specializations. And I'd also like to acknowledge your role as head of the office of the CUSMA representation for trade and investment at the Mexican Ministry of Economy in Mexico. That was over 4 years, 2019 to 23, and that followed your role for 2 decades serving in the ministry focused on economic development. Jacqueline, to kick us off for the first introductory remarks, welcome to the floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon, buenas tardes a todos. It is an honor to be here with you today, and I appreciate the organizer for this invitation, especially the Victoria and Africa Desk and all of the people involved in this event. And I am pleased to share this panel with these distinguished people, and I would like to present some facts about Mexico and Canada. But also, I would like to mention that Mexico and Canada are strategic partners. Mexico is a great platform to expand operation in Latin America. We have in Mexico 15 trade agreements with 52 countries in 4 continents. And also in Mexico, we have 32 states in Mexico. Serves as a hub in Latin America. And we have the states in Mexico have different orientation. For example, in the north part of Mexico, we have the Nuevo León, focus on manufacturing, or Sonora, we focus on clean energy, or in the central part in Mexico, we have Aguascalientes, also focus on manufacturing, or Puebla in textile, and also we have in the southeast in Tabasco or Chiapas, focus on agriculture and other things. And after the US, Mexico is the second closest country to Canada. That is in America. That is an important thing to consider when you are planning your best strategy. And also the population in Mexico is around 126 million now. But also, we can you, sorry, I can, yeah, sorry, this is my previous comments. And the next one, since NAFTA, CUSMA, we are the 3rd largest trading partner to Canada, in Mexico. And also, Canada is the 2nd destination for Mexican exports. As you can see, or as you may know, with NAFTA, we have 2 blocks, Mexico and US, and Canada and US. But we need to work together to connect more Mexico and Canada. Our bilateral trade from the 1996 was 6 billion, and now we are around 40 billion. However, the trade is just around 3.6% between Mexico and Canada. And it's this one. And yeah, it's the export, the Canadian export to Canada is just around 1.1%. And that is we need to work more in that area. But there are another challenges. For example, Canadian companies sometimes find challenging to understand how to do business in Mexico. But in the same way, with some small and medium enterprises in Mexico, they don't know how to do business in Canada. And provinces is another project to diversify, or another potential, because our trade is just focus, or is more focused in 4 provinces. In Ontario, with 74%, bilateral trade is with Ontario, and then Quebec just 8%, Alberta and British Columbia. And 4 provinces account 95% of our trade, and that is another potential thing to consider. The exports to Mexico, as you may know, the automotive and electric components or consumer goods is for export. It's export to Mexico. And also Canada export to Mexico some grains like canola, oats and other things focus on agriculture. And for import from Mexico, Canada imports motor vehicles, automotive, consumer goods, agriculture like avocados, limes, mangoes, and so on. And also Canada imports metallic and non-metallic things from Mexico. And finally, investment. Investment is another component. Canada is the third largest source of investment in Mexico. Mexico is an attractive destination for investment. And for example, we have now some sectors with the strategy sectors in Mexico, like textiles, semiconductors, shoes, and other like second residences in Mexico. And we have success stories for Canadian companies established in Mexico, like Scotiabank or TC Energy or Martin Rea or Linamar. There are many companies now investing in Mexico. That's for now. Thank you so much, and muchas gracias.
Thank you very much for that fantastic context. And we'll definitely delve into some of the key examples and companies. I know there are many big names in Mexico, and you've been at the forefront of so much of that. Our next panelist, who I'd love to welcome, is Benjamin Ibela, Trade Commissioner for Inclusive Growth at Global Affairs Canada. The Trade Commissioner service, certainly on the African continent, where I've been focused, has been at the forefront of so many important initiatives to showcase great Canadian companies and their contribution to trade and investment. Benjamin is the national lead at Global Affairs Canada's Trade Commissioner Service, where he focuses on inclusive trade, with working with trade officers across the world to ensure that international trade benefits are widely shared. Of course, you have trade on the one hand, but you have values on the other hand, which are vitally important, and many of those values of inclusivity, I know, in your words, Benjamin, are lived out every day through what you seek to do. So I welcome you to sketch some context for your remarks today. Thank you.
Okay, hi, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you today. I'm here expected to talk to you about, a little known service owned or that operates within the government of Canada called the Trade Commissioner Service. Now, when we're talking about diversification, we hear, where do I start? How do I do business with another country? What is it like in that particular country? What are some of the rules and regulations that I have to look out for? What are the opportunities that are there? This is where we, the Trade Commissioner, come in, right? So what is the Trade Commissioner Service? So the Trade Commissioner Service is a network of people like myself. So there are about 1,000 of us in 160 cities around the world. And our job is really to help Canadian companies expand their businesses globally. So what we do is we offer things like market intelligence. We connect you with the right partners. So if you want to know who in your business does what in that particular country, what are some of your potential competitors, what are some of the pitfalls perhaps that you should avoid when doing business in a particular country, this is where we come in, right? And it's a free service for Canadian businesses, right? Not many people know about it, but I'm here to change that. And we're going to keep doing that throughout this whole period of diversification. How do we ensure that people are aware of the services that are out there? So another thing that we do, we actually offer funding, right? So we have a flagship program called Can Export. So one of them is dedicated to the businesses themselves, the small and medium-sized businesses. So we know expanding globally, it's not only that it's challenging, it could be also expensive, right? So we offer some of that grants and contribution to help you with some of the export activities that you need to put in place, right? We also have, so for those of you who are members of associations, right? Business associations that are out there, we also offer funding to those associations to put together programming to support your export activities, right? There's also one for community, there's investment, there's research and development as well. And of course, this is the year of technology. This is the era of technology, right? So we have great CTAs, Canadian Technology Accelerators, that we put together for those companies that are focused on ICT. So I'll back up a little bit about the Trade Commissioner. So it's been around for 125 years, right? So it's proven. We serve about 10,000 clients per year, every single year. And I mentioned there are about 1,000 of us out there in 160 cities around the world. So what we do, we actually partner with local staff, right? So people who understand the market, who know how they operate, and we bring them on board to give you that advice of people who live the reality, who live in that country, who knows the who's who to support you throughout. And then we have 6 regional offices across the whole country. Now, we also have satellite offices in every province in this country. So our regional offices are essentially the point of entry for you if you want to join the Trade Commissioner Service. So these are our folks whom, and I'm hoping a lot of you will come to see me after, I'll introduce them to you. What they do, they get to know you, your business, and what exactly you're looking for, and make sure that you are export ready. And once you are, we can connect you to the folks abroad in the market of interest. So I talked a little bit about this already. So market insight, if you're looking for connecting you with key clients, right? And finding the right opportunity. And of course, if you're gonna do business in the foreign countries, there are chances that, you're gonna bump into some challenges. We will help you work through those challenges. And this is the funding program that I was talking about. So Can Export, so one for SME, one for association, there's one for community investment, and for innovation as well, so research and development. Now, my team specifically, my unit, we focus on inclusive trade. So recognizing that there are segments of our society, women, Indigenous, Black and other racialized Canadians, members of the 2S LGBTQI+, and youth, who traditionally have not been included as much in trade. So we focus on bringing those opportunities to them, really making sure that, the introduction before I came to the stage, is making sure those opportunities are also shared with members of those communities. So we hold things from networking events to trade business delegation all over the world and in Canada as well. So this slide, and I'm hoping the Africa Trade Desk would share that with you later on, but those are kind of the contact information of my colleagues that are posted in regional offices across the country. And of course, I'm here I'll be more than happy to make a warm introduction to those colleagues so that they can get to know you and your business and help you with those opportunities and connecting you with those folks that are abroad to explore your market of interest. That's it. Thank you.
Benjamin, thank you so much. And before we get into the Q&A session, it is my great pleasure to acknowledge the many people joining us online, not just from across Canada, but many of these key markets. And among them is Veena, who joins us as Vice President of the Asia Pacific Foundation. Veena Najibullah joined the organization as Vice President in November 2023, and she leads Canada's research, education, and network support opportunities. As overseer of the Foundation's granting and research fellowship programs, Nina has been focused on key development and capacity building projects. She's a frequent commentator for many of you who see her, as I do, online, looking at issues of geopolitics, Canada's foreign policy, and Canada-Asian relations. Vina, you're also an adjunct professor at the School of Public Policy and Global Affairs at the University of British Columbia, among your many other roles that you play in the think tank space. It's an absolute pleasure to invite you and welcome you from all of us in Ottawa very warmly for your opening remarks in this first panel discussion. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Gareth, for that generous introduction, and thank you so much to the organizers for including me in today's discussion. Apologies for not being with you in person in Ottawa. I'm joining you from sunny Vancouver, where spring has really arrived, so just to make everyone in the audience jealous of our weather. I'm also very delighted to be speaking about trade diversification to the Indo-Pacific or Asia-Pacific region. Obviously, coming to you from the Asia-Pacific Foundation, that is our mandate, is to deepen Canada's engagement and understanding with the region, including when it comes to trade and economic relations. So as you would know, the Indo-Pacific or the Asia-Pacific, I'll use that interchangeably, but I'm essentially speaking to the geography that includes the Indian subcontinent as well as the East Asia, as well as the Pacific part of Canada and the US. The Indo-Pacific is one of the most dynamic parts of the world when it comes to economic growth. It has the fastest growing middle class, big emerging markets. In fact, 2/3 of global GDP growth last year came from this region. When you think of the Indo-Pacific, certainly from our perspective, we kind of think of the fast emerging markets of like India and ASEAN countries, the 10 Southeast Asian countries like Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore and such, as well as the sort of the mature economies, developed economies like Japan and South Korea. And then there's China, which is big, but more complicated. So, and when we speak to our counterparts in Canada in terms of diversifying their business opportunities in Asia, you kind of have to think of that in those three categories. And of course, the most promise that we're seeing is in areas that are fastest growing. So emerging economies in Southeast Asia and India represent the greatest potential. Although with India, of course, things are a little bit more complicated because of the politics of Canada-India relations. And I'm happy to speak about that a bit more. With mature economies like Japan and Korea, we're seeing a ton of opportunity as well, particularly in sectors like natural resources, energy. With the launch of LNG Canada in 2025, we'll see even more growth when it comes to energy exports to that region. We're also seeing opportunities in the critical minerals sector, as well as EVs with those two countries. So lots there, but some challenges now in the context of the US dynamics. So again, happy to unpack sort of what the geopolitical shifts and the kind of the policies of the Trump administration, what that would mean both in terms of opportunities, but also challenges, because for the last few weeks, we've all been speaking about the threats that are now emanating from the shifts in the US policy, but that also has some opportunities, and certainly also with Asia. China, of course, remains a critical market for Canadian exports. In fact, 40% of all of our exports to the Indo-Pacific goes to China. So it is significant. But when we speak of diversification, it also means diversification within Asia. So Canada first looked at the Indo-Pacific in order to be able to diversify markets away from the US. But within Asia, there is also diversification or de-risking, if you will, from China, because China represents certain risks. We're seeing that now, most notably with respect to canola. You probably have seen the headlines. We are all in a trade dispute, not just with the US, which dominates the news, but also with China. China has put in 100% tariffs on canola products, as well as 25% tariffs on pork and some seafood. So that is impacting, obviously, lots of Canadian stakeholders, especially in Western Canada, in Alberta and Saskatchewan, but also some provinces in Atlantic Canada that are exporting quite a bit of seafood. So trade relations with China are important, but there are significant risks that need to be managed. And the best way to do that, obviously, is to not be over-reliant on China. It's hard to do because China is a big market. So for instance, for canola, 63% of our canola went to China. So obviously these tariffs are really, really damaging, potentially damaging for canola farmers in Western Canada. But there are opportunities to diversify away from China, as I mentioned, and seek advantages in places like Southeast Asia, as well as India, and continue to deepen relations with Japan and Korea. In terms of sort of how to best take advantage of this region, I'll have to note that we have a number of things in place. So 2 years ago, the government, federal government, launched the Indo-Pacific Strategy, which is an overall strategy for Canada's engagement with the region. It has a robust pillar on trade and investment. And we've also opened up a number of offices in the region, specifically to look, for instance, at agricultural products, because there's so much demand in Southeast Asia, especially in other parts of the region, in Canadian food exports. So we have a structure in place in the region that businesses can take advantage of. That's already building on top of the Trade Commissioner services that my fellow panelists spoke about, which have been obviously in existence for many years, but we now have dedicated offices looking at specific sectors in the region. The region also still has a lot of trade agreements. So Canada, we often boast that we have the largest number of free trade agreements of any other G7 country, and that's also notable in this region as well. So we have, of course, the CPTPP, that's a mouthful, but that's a Comprehensive Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement, which is a gold standard when it comes to trade agreements. It brings together now, with the accession of the UK, 11 other countries plus Canada into a traditional free trade agreement, which means lower tariffs, lower barriers for access. So that allows Canadians to do business in the region at a comparative advantage. So with countries like Japan and a number of countries in Southeast Asia, as well as Australia, New Zealand, and UK are part of CPTPP. So businesses could take advantage of that, as well as newer agreements. Just at the end of last year, we signed a comprehensive economic partnership agreement with Indonesia. And Indonesia is, of course, the largest country in Southeast Asia, fast growing economy, growing middle class, lots of demand for Canadian energy and food resources, as well as technology and investment. So that's something to take advantage of. We're also negotiating an agreement with ASEAN, the entire Southeast Asia trading bloc, the 10 countries. That's meant to come into effect at the end of this year. So businesses can take advantage of those agreements, take advantage of the support systems that exist through the Trade Commissioner Service, Export Development Canada, organizations like ours, Asia Pacific Foundation. So there's a whole ecosystem of Canadian organizations that are there to support you to make sense of these markets. The other element is, especially for places like India and Indonesia, you have to take advantage of local partnerships and lean into Canadian diaspora communities and others who know the local markets well. So, and come in with kind of a long-term agenda. Things move a little bit slower, and having those local partnerships matter. The other elements, of course, managing risk. So unfortunately, in the current context, there is no such thing as trade or economic engagement without politics or geopolitics. There are lots of risks in shifting supply chains, in US-China dynamics, especially for Asia. I mean, so Asia has a ton of opportunities, but it also is the epicenter of geopolitical great power competition between US and China. So in order to properly engage in the region, you have to have strategies to mitigate risk, to diversify your exposure, to not be over-reliant, and to be able to shift as things shift, as we're currently experiencing. I'll note a couple of things just to put it on your radar with a couple of countries. So one, South Korea. We will be hosting a delegation from South Korea to Ontario, in particular in April. This is one of the largest gatherings organized with the Chamber of Commerce of South Korea. So for those who are interested in deepening relations, and again, opportunities with Korea are many: critical minerals, nuclear sector, obviously agri-food, energy, all of that. The other thing to mention is, and if you're interested, very happy to engage in the Q&A, but similar to my fellow panelists, we also very much are committed to inclusive trade. So one of my colleagues out of our Toronto office leads trade missions, specifically focusing at women's women entrepreneurs, small and medium enterprise entrepreneurs who are interested in expanding into the region. So we take about 2 delegations per year to 2 different geographies in the Indo-Pacific, and that, of course, closely coordinates and complements what also federal government is doing in terms of these Team Canada missions to the region. So there are those opportunities. Last year we took delegations to Vietnam and Taiwan. So if you're interested, again, something to look into. And then finally, we also have a program of capacity development with small and medium enterprises in Southeast Asia. So there's a lot of learnings that we have. It's a direct program of support to businesses in the region, but of course it also provides opportunities for connecting to small and medium-sized businesses here in Canada who are interested in expanding to the region. So again, forgive me for not being with you in person. It's a little bit harder to participate. So that's why I didn't do PowerPoint slides, just to kind of try to keep this as engaging as possible, but really grateful for the opportunity to speak a little bit about what's possible in the Indo-Pacific region. Garrett, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for such an extensive overview. I really, really appreciate that. And some of the insights from a region where, relative to others, we've seen enormous advances, especially with some of the key examples you gave, including the opportunities and the risks, Vina, that you highlighted. So I was going to raise that question with you, but you've preempted it. So I'd like to go over to Jacqueline and really just zone in on Mexico, because one of the challenges I find, and I'm sure others find it too, when you're focused on a much bigger region, you've always got to be reminded of the individual markets. You're 100% focused on one specific country market. I know Scotiabank's there, Magna, Martin Ria, some big companies. It's a long-standing relationship, as you pointed out. But right now, from today, what are the key sectors you're advising people to look at from an import and export perspective in making the case that this is how you optimally diversify as a Canadian business?
Thank you for the question. In Mexico now, the government of Mexico now, they are working on a Plan Mexico, and they are launch a strategy to focus on some sectors like textiles, for example, textile and shoes, pharmaceutical and medical devices, agriculture, agribusiness, semiconductors, automotive, consumer goods, real estate, and railroads. But also there are success stories in Mexico, but with the small and medium enterprises. For example, you can find in Mexico some Canadian companies, designers or the fashion designers or for another areas or things, and they design in Canada and manufacturing in Mexico, and it's a joint venture with a Mexican company, and there are great success stories. Thanks so much.
Fantastic. Benjamin, you've been working with hundreds of companies you outlined, and of course the work of 125 years goes without saying. But right now, some companies are talking about the need to quickly, rapidly move and change course. With the companies that you've been working with in your portfolio, what are some of the big ways you get success stories that, dare I say, are sometimes called quick wins? In this case, by necessity, because people are looking to build new relationships in light of risks that weren't there, just a year ago in many respects.
That's a good question. Quick wins, I guess it really depends on the company. One thing I would say is that we need to leverage. We talked a little bit about it, that Canada has over a free trade agreement with 51 countries around the world, right? That is definitely something you should tap into. And on top of that, if you're part of a diaspora, the quick win is also you already know the market. You already know how certain things operate in that particular country or your country of origin, right? Take advantage of those connections, leverage them to get your product or service out there. And also online, a lot of people forget that even if you're selling things online, you are actually exporting. All right, that's included in there. So leverage the technology, leverage your connections, and that should be a good place to start.
Brilliant. Going back to the Asia-Pacific region, Vina, a lot of trade agreements already in place, and you pointed out some of the challenges there. There is a new government, newly elected leadership, newly elected political leadership, a new cabinet, whatever that looks like, however much it's changed. But the fact is, when people come to you for advice, regardless of the time period, what are some of the broad points that you always point out are key for trade diversification? And then what would you encourage as particularly important now, more so than ever, given the context that we're in?
Absolutely. Thanks, Gareth. Obviously, we've been talking about trade diversification in Canada for many, many years, and it's been really hard to move the needle on that. The gravitational pull of the market south of us, the United States market, has been really just too strong, right? So we've been sitting at about 76 to 80% of our export to the US for obvious reasons. And one of the big reasons is export infrastructure. So it's nice for us to sort of speak about all the amazing opportunities that exist, including in the Indo-Pacific region, and the opportunities are there. The demand for what Canada has, agri-food, natural resources, technology, it's very high, but it's hard for us to get it out there because of really three things. One is export infrastructure, and that's something that we need to address as a nation. And of course, it's been great to hear all parties, and particularly the new Prime Minister Carney speaking to that. The other one is interprovincial barriers. So in terms of, like, for instance, if you look at a place like Alberta, yes, we have 3 oceans, but Alberta is basically landlocked, and its main trading routes are down to the south. So having opportunity, essentially easier regulatory frameworks and a lot more interprovincial trade and involvement. That's the second. And the third element, and that's something that a lot of actors in the Indo-Pacific also say, is figuring out ways to better manage our relations with Indigenous communities, being able to have them at the table as stakeholders, but also facilitate their participation in Canadian exports to the region, but also as stakeholders in attracting investment back into Canada. Because so much of our trade is not just about selling stuff, but also having deep investment opportunities, being able to attract capital, to develop Canada, to move up the value chain. And for us to do that, we need to have policies that are really inclusive of all stakeholders, including obviously Indigenous communities who have a lot to offer. And obviously when it comes to natural resources are a key stakeholder. So we have some, I mean, yes, we need to look outside, but I guess my answer, Gareth, just in one word, is that we have a lot of work to do here in Canada. In kind of addressing how we invest in developing infrastructure, how we invest in supporting innovation, and particularly scaling our incredibly promising small businesses to be able to be export ready and to go out through specific supports. And then the final element is working as a one country rather than 13 economies, as I think Mark Carney has been saying on the campaign trail. Very much support that. I hope that answers, and happy to expand.
Thank you very much. And of course, to fellow panelists, feel free to weigh in on any of the previous questions. Looking again at Mexico as a very specific market, you've run us through, Jacqueline, some of the key export and import opportunities. If you look at that economy and you take Canadian investors and the encouragements of trade diversification as also long-term investment, could you walk through some of the trends you see for Canadian companies and opportunities from that perspective within Mexico?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, and as I mentioned in my presentation, Canada is the origin of the capital in Mexico. The investment in Mexico is Canada is the third largest trading partner in Mexico and investment. And they invest, I have the numbers in my presentation, but Canadian investors are investing in Mexico in mining or in energy and in transport in some in these sectors. But now there are another projects, for example, in agriculture. Canadian investors, they could invest in Mexico in projects in the greenhouses, for example, and then export to Canada, and also to work with Mexican companies. And also in another way, Mexican companies are also expanding operation in Canada or internationalization projects for to export in another countries. Like you mentioned, Canada has a free trade agreement with Europe, and it's a trade with a comprehensive trade, and the Mexican companies are establishing here and then export to other countries like Europe or other countries in Africa, for example. They are looking to expand operation as well. And also, I would like to mention that in Mexico, there are offices from provinces from Canada. Alberta is there, Saskatchewan, British Columbia, Ontario, Quebec. And they are working hard to promote the export to Canadian export to Mexico, and they have a very good job in Mexico.
Brilliant. Thanks very much. Benjamin, when you come across the challenges that people identify commonly within companies, a twofold question. What are some of the most frequent challenges you hear? And secondly, where companies say, look, I want to diversify, but I only want to stick with countries or regions where there are existing free trade agreements. What's your response to them? So it's a twofold question, if you don't mind. Thank you.
I think one of the biggest challenge that we see is access to finance, right? That's a big one. And we all know there are very few grants and contribution programs out there. But this is why I brought a program that we have. How we, the Trade Commissioner, work around it is we have Can Export, right? Not only to help small businesses, we also help association, we also help research and development, right? So that's one. Another challenge that we get often is the contact. Who does what in what country? Who should I talk to? Where do I even start, right? So this is how we come into play. The Trade Commissioner comes into place with the market intelligence, right? But we also need to make sure that you've done your homework, right? So for those of you, and I'm hoping all of you will come see me after and for connection, what the first thing we want to get to know is really your business, right? What kind of homework have you done? Do you know your competitors? Often in another country, when you do go to export, you may have to change your label to meet some of the legal or the requirements in those countries, right? Those are some of the challenges, some of the that people face and that we can help. And also sometimes you may have to go to market like 4 or 5 times before you actually get any traction, right? We'll help you with those. Business delegations, we'll give you a taste of what it's like. Come check out the market so you have an idea of what to expect. Sorry, what was the second fold?
The second was companies are recognizing trade diversification. What do you say to a company that says, look, Trade Commissioner, I'm only comfortable with working with a country where we have an existing free trade agreement, a FIPA, or something more advanced, so to speak. What's your initial response to those approaches?
I think it's all about managing your risk, right? I think at the end of the day, you want to sell your product where it is needed, right? If there's an opportunity in another market, and of course, you as a business owner, you need to make sure it meets your value, right? But if there's an opportunity in another market, why wouldn't you pursue it, right? Sometimes we see businesses that are too focused on the big markets, right? It's not always a good strategy because sometimes the big market are saturated. You face a lot more competition. It may be worth it to go to a smaller market, and that's also a way of you to learn, to get traction, to innovate. So that way, when you're ready to take on that big market, you are equipped. You know what to expect. So that's typically how we work. We don't only suggest one market. We can tell you, have you ever considered this market also? There may be an opportunity there. There's a need for your product or your service there. So we highly recommend that you pursue that option as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Benjamin. We've got about 15 minutes for some Q&A. Thank you so much to everyone online who's got questions as well, and the team is welcome to forward them on to me here at the front. So we'll take a round of 3 questions. And as we do that, I just want to recognize some of the people involved in the Africa Trade and Investment Stream who aren't on panel today but are available for conversation. His Excellency Cecil Chinenere, Ambassador of the Republic of Zimbabwe, where we recently had a conference. Welcome, sir. Good to see you and your team. 24 Canadian companies who went out to Harare and over to Mashonaland West, which I was very privileged to be a part of. The chair of the board of the Canada-Africa Chamber of Business, Paula Caldwell-Sanange, who we'll hear from in a bit, Anna Tozola, special envoy to the DRC and a VP alongside Susan Namalindwa. I'll stop the plug for Africa, but it is an incredible place for diversification across each of those individual markets. Thanks for your work there, Benjamin, in addition to the great things we see in Mexico and, of course, the Asia Pacific, which is incredibly advanced. And I think a template for many of us, if I can speak to this personally, for what is possible, Vina. And so congrats on the successes that we've had in that regard. First question, Susan, I'll allow you to identify, okay, one, and I'll identify our second question just to my left. Thank you.
Thank you, Susan. Congratulations, everyone. Great presentations. Thank you so much. My question actually is going to be to each of our distinguished speakers. Could they give us a feeling for their markets? Could they give us a feeling for which products would be more interesting or would have the most potential? Which Canadian products do you think would have the most potential for on the Mexican market, on the Asia Pacific market, and around the world?
Thank you very much. And sorry, your name and organization?
My name is Christian Sivière. I work with Solampex. I give trainings at Invest Ottawa on a regular basis.
Brilliant.
Actually.
Thank you very much. And I just wanted to acknowledge that we all heard from our first speaker. Thank you very much, Gafal, for the fact that you're happy to take any questions. We really do appreciate that. And Susan's coming over for the second question. And can I get a third question from the audience, if not online? Yes, excellent. Thank you.
Thank you. Name is Bolahao Mark George Consultants. We do business solutions for SMEs and internationally. For me, the question really is, we've been talking, and I think Vina alluded to it, we've been talking about diversification of trade for years and how we push this conversation apart from going to, the question really is, how do we take out the risk aversion of SMEs and Canadian businesses? I've spent 10 years, Gareth, I'm a member of the chamber. We've done this pushing, go out. And it's whether it's go to, I know the Trade Commissioner's office in numerous African countries and the work they do. But Canadian businesses just want to sell to America. How do we change the narrative? How do we change and educate to, how do we do this? That's really my question.
Thank you very much. And if there's no third question online, we do have a third question. I'll go to the online audience and we'll come back. Thank you so much.
Hey, so this is a question from Chris from the chat, and it's regarding Mexico, wondering if there's still tax-free zones for foreign investment, I think referred to as maquiladoras.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I'll go to Vina first, and then we'll come back here to Ottawa. Thank you. And feel free to take those questions in any particular order. Thanks once again.
Thank you so much, Gareth, and thank you so much for all the questions. I'll take a couple of them. One from the gentleman who spoke about how do we actually incentivize Canadian companies to go abroad. I think that is a terrific question. I think we didn't diversify because we did have access to US markets. So I think necessity now will be different. We have to, because the US is becoming more unreliable and more difficult for Canada. In order to be able to export abroad, Canadian companies have to be competitive. So we do need to invest in competitiveness and increasing productivity, which means support to innovation, support to scaling of our businesses. It also means providing actual incentive to go abroad. So not just support for those who are interested, but incentives in terms of taxes, in terms of things that we can help in terms of scaling. The other thing is on financing. We've mentioned EDC, both Benjamin and I mentioned that. One thing to consider is in other countries, organizations like Export Development Canada, so other, are much more of a tool of industrial policy, meaning that they're offering financing at below market rate. And they're not profitable. So EDC is actually a very profitable Crown corporation. It makes about 500 million each year, returns it to the government. So, which is great. And I think that model had worked for many years. But in the current environment where we're asking for some radical solutions, kind of questioning all the assumptions, we may need to explore real radical things like, can we underwrite that risk in a much more serious way? So in terms of giving financing at not market rates, but much lower rates for those who are willing to take the risk and go abroad. So in other words, I am completely with the gentleman who says we've tried this for many years, it hasn't worked. Now we have a real necessity, I think, to do it. And we need to invest and look at the comprehensive strategy, things that incentivize people to go abroad, businesses to export, but also things that address deficits here in the country in terms of infrastructure, in terms of harmonizing regulations, in terms of making doing business in Canada much more profitable so that we are competitive, especially in a market like Asia. We have to be competitive. I'm not talking about just selling commodities, which obviously we can do, but in terms of selling other things, we have a long way to go. And that gets me to the second question of what are some of the kind of promising things in Asia. So agri-food and energy resources, yes, there's a huge demand for that. But then there's also interest in technology that's connected to essentially climate technology. So anything that helps with renewable, with the transition to green economies, there's a lot of demand for that in the region. And then finally, parts, particularly aerospace and defense sector. So South Korea, Singapore, a few other places, India are interested also in partnering with Canadian companies that are part of our defense industrial base. Of course, on that issue, we need to watch for national security concerns, and it would need to be case by case, but there is some demand and opportunities there as well. I will stop there. Thanks, Gareth.
Thank you very much. Jacqueline, and followed by Benjamin. Thank you.
Referring to the opportunities in Mexico and Canada for Canadian companies, and focus, for example, in the sectors that they are now a strategy to connect with other countries like Canada, for example, in semiconductors, in automotive, consumer goods. And consumer goods also depend on that state in Mexico. In the north part, for example, in Nuevo León, I know that there are a lot of Mexican foods or Mexican producers for foods, and they are importing things from Canada, for example. Or in the south part of Mexico, we have the railroad, and also there are a Canadian company in Mexico now with a big project, in the railroad, and also there are some other sectors related with this main sector, and it's my general comment. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
I guess I'll take the question about which sector I guess are in demand. It's a hard one to answer. But I will say, I will add something like in health sciences, right? Food security. If you are working in those sectors, those are things that we will always need, right? That said, as a business owner, you've come up with your idea because you believe in it, because you've done the research and there is demand for your product. So I highly encourage you that if you have an idea and you've done your homework, that shouldn't stop you from pursuing it, right? Provided that you are aware of the resources that are out there, and then you do your homework. That should be enough to don't give up on your dream, but pursue it if it makes sense, right? On the question about the necessity for trade diversification, so I think this is what we talk about risk, putting all your eggs in one basket, right? This is how we find ourselves in this situation now. We have no option to diversify. And I want to thank my folks, some of my colleagues are here from the trade policy side of the shop, who do a wonderful job at going up there and exploring other opportunities with other countries, right? Free trade agreement with other countries so that we can open up perhaps an aspect of the world that we didn't think about, right? And that brings more opportunities for Canadian companies to look at other markets that perhaps we didn't think of. And that's the way we get to reduce risk, by not only focusing on one market, but diversifying not only who exports, what we export, and where we export.
Thanks very much, Benjamin. We've got 5 minutes, and then we have an opportunity to deepen these discussions during networking. For those who aren't there, I wanted to give any remaining questions, first and foremost, to those online. Otherwise, if there are any pressing questions from the floor, we'll begin online. Thank you.
So another question from online is about the support for Canadian businesses looking to import products from outside of Canada in this new environment with new relationships, and also for companies outside of Canada looking to export into Canada through new relationships in this current environment as well.
Thank you very much for those two questions. Is there a final question from the floor? Excellent. Thank you very much for your patience.
Hi, my name is Dan, and I'm from Transport Logistics. We service a lot of Canadian importers and exporters and manage their supply chain. And further to that gentleman's question over there, but how do we, or why do Canadian companies, why do they not trade outside of America? I would say one of the common things I hear from our clients is risk, especially in trade disputes, okay? If the WTO has lost a lot of teeth in terms of enforcement, right, what has the Trade Commission, the government of Canada, government of Mexico, what's being done to kind of create some alternative framework of dispute resolution, something with teeth, something that has credibility, right? Because if I'm a Canadian company and I'm exporting something to Africa, let's say, okay, and something were to happen, like I'm sending something to Zimbabwe, what legal recourse would my client have? And vice versa, if a Zimbabwean company, right, had a dispute with a Canadian importer, right, how would that dispute be resolved?
Thank you, Dan.
In light of the WTO having no teeth whatsoever.
I'll begin, thanks very much, on that with you, Benjamin, and then perhaps we'll come to you, Jacqueline, and we'll finish up in BC. Benjamin.
Great question, and I will, give the credit where it's due to my trade policy colleagues. Their job, or part of their job, is to negotiate those free trade agreement, right? And to put those mechanisms in place, those dispute mechanism that the signatory of those agreement agree to should they run into some challenges, some dispute, right? I don't know if it always works, right? But they are there. We still need to have some mechanism within any free trade agreement that allows you that if you run into trouble or if you don't agree with trade practices that your partner that you signed an agreement with, there should be a mechanism for you to talk about it and try to resolve that issue, right? But not necessarily having to go through the WTO, but there are many ways of negotiating or talking about it before it escalates to a greater level. So I'll leave that to my trade policy folks who do an amazing job of making sure we have a mechanism in there in every single free trade agreement that we sign to make sure that not only our companies are protected, but also foreign companies are protected when they come across unfair trade practices.
Thank you so much, Benjamin. Jacqueline.
Yes, I would like to mention in the previous question the IMEX, the project for Maquila in Mexico. I could send the information by email if they could give me the email or information. And for the dispute settlements, and also in Mexico, as I mentioned, we have 15 trade agreements with this part of in our treaties. Like most of them, they have the dispute mechanism for foreign investors. And for example, Canadian investors are protected in Mexico with those treaties. And also we have the bilateral investment treaties with with 30 countries to protect as well investment in Mexico. But also, I could like to mention that in Canada, for example, in vegetables or in some produce, Canada has a dispute resolution corporation, the DRC. And for example, Mexican companies, when they are looking to export to Canada, could sign that membership, and there is a dispute. There is a mechanism to protect or no, to resolve under an amicable query or an arbitration, but private arbitration with this dispute. But there are some mechanisms, and also the contract is so important. And I am a lawyer, and when I saw the contract with the clients, it is so important to start with a very good contract, with the terms of the contract, to establish that, to start the process, not to export or import. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you very much. And finally, to conclude our session, Vina, thank you very much to weigh in on those two questions.
Sure, happy to, Gareth. On the question of what to do with disputes, so in Asia, again, happily, we do have free trade agreement, both the regional CPTPP that I had mentioned, as well as agreements with South Korea, Indonesia. We're negotiating agreements with ASEAN. So I think in Asia, we're doing relatively well. And of course, the fact that WTO is under strain does matter, but we do need to now lean in much more into these other regional trading agreements, as well as bilateral trading agreements. On the question of, are we doing anything to sort of make doing business in Canada easier and attract trade and investment into Canada? Absolutely. There is a whole slew of organizations like Invest Ottawa, Invest Canada, Invest BC, and others who focus primarily on attracting investments into the country, and as well as obviously trade services around the world, including from provincial governments who are connecting businesses that are interested in doing business in Canada. We have a strong brand. This is one thing that I have to note. Brand Canada is strong around the world. People do want to buy and do business with Canada. We just have for many, many years been privileged in having to essentially only rely on the US. I think that was fine and it worked with us, but that privileged position unfortunately is coming to an end. And now we have to do a lot more to be able to be competitive on the global market. And a lot of that work will have to be in country. It's less about negotiating more agreements or going out. It's about figuring out how do we build infrastructure, how do we invest in competitiveness, and how do we support organizations through incentives to go beyond the North American market. I will stop there. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Vina. And thank you very much to you, to Jacqueline, to Benjamin. And what I want to say in listening to each one of your remarks is, while many people are reacting, looking at new markets, you've really laid the foundations, in many cases for decades, for the opportunity and for the moment that we're at today. So for that, I say a massive thank you. And for your insights, we're truly, truly grateful. Thank you. And as I hand the floor back to Victoria Shaw, I wanted to say, Victoria and Susan, thank you so much for providing this incredible service to each one of us on a day that is, of course, a momentous one, and helping ensure we take the right steps going forward. Truly appreciate it as well. That's an absolute applause. Sorry, I'm just getting the mic back in. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you. Whoop. Thank you, Gareth. Thank you to all of our speakers. Gareth, thank you for managing all of that so well, as we know that you would. We know you very well, and that was exactly the level that we were all expecting. So thank you. To our speakers, those were really great ideas, really great information, several things that I did not know. I really appreciate your insights. I am now not going to stand between everybody else and the coffee and tea and water. Go take a break. Go take a health break. We're starting back at 2:50.
trading day and night, pioneering new paths where futures ignite. Maple leaf, our emblem of pride. New markets call, inviting far and wide. Sealing deals that break the tide. Canada's trade unites the world worldwide. Digital streams and global trade waves, carving out markets where opportunity paves. From prairies to ports, our vision stays, expanding partnerships in innovative ways. Maple leaf, our emblem of pride. New markets call, inviting far and wide. Sealing deals that break the tide. Canada's trade unites the world worldwide.
Hello, everyone. I'm thrilled to explore one of the biggest, boldest, and most overlooked opportunities for Canadian businesses, trade with Africa. I'm Susan Namulindwa, AI, Executive Director of the Africa Trade Desk, and I'll walk you through the economic potential, the common misconceptions, and most importantly, the concrete steps we've built to help you succeed. Whether you're just curious or ready to expand, this session is your launch pad. So let's dive in and discover what's possible. Did you know Africa has the fastest growing economies on the planet? By 2045, it'll be the world's fastest urbanizing region, bigger than China or India. Canada's export opportunities there are massive, folks, but we've barely scratched the surface. Opportunities knocking loud and clear. Let's fling that door wide open. Now, I know some of you have concerns. Let's tackle them head on. I hear it all the time. Too complicated, too dangerous, too slow. I don't have connections. I don't know where to start. I don't have the resources. Sound familiar? These are excuses, folks. And excuses are the nails that build the house of failure. It's time to tear it down and build a bridge to success. So, how do we do that? Africa Trade Desk has the answer. That's why Africa Trade Desk is here, friends. We believe trade is the spark that ignites economic growth. Our mission: to supercharge trade between Canada and Africa by building the biggest Afro-Canadian business ecosystem around. We're finding opportunities, vetting partners, securing funding, speeding things up, and cutting risks. We're your ladder to the top. And we've got a powerhouse team behind us. Picture this: 75 African businesses, 25 Canadian companies, 750 diaspora members, 10 government institutions, 15 service providers, lawyers, advisors, logistics pros, and 5 financial partners, all pulling together with one goal: growth. This isn't just a network, it's a rocket ship to success. Curious what we bring to the table? Listen up. We've got solutions for every hurdle. Don't know where to start? Our strategy development gives you market insights and trends. No connections. Business development hooks you up with opportunities and influencers. Too slow or risky? Risk management and project support, on-the-ground help and training, keep you safe and fast. We've got your back. And the process: simple as pie. Here's how it works. Step 1. Enroll in our ecosystem, get vetted, and join the family. Step 2. Define your project. We'll match you with the right partners. Step 3. Execute with our support. It's like a GPS for your business. No deeters, no dead ends. So, what's stopping you? The opportunity's here, the support's here. Let's grab it together. You don't have to be great to start, but you've got to start to be great. Let's take that first step today and make history. Sign up for our ecosystem. Visit africatradedesk.com or email us at contact@africatradedesk.com to enroll today.
Ladies and gentlemen, hello. Hello, hello, hello. I'm so happy to see everybody playing very well with each other in the sandbox, but I have to call everybody back to their seats, please. Hello. Hello, hello, hello. Hello. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, I am calling you back to class. Sorry to interrupt the play. Everybody's being nice, but calling you back. Thank you. Please grab your coffees and your teas and your waters, and let's take our seats again so we can stick to the schedule here.
Hello, everyone. I'm thrilled to explore one of the biggest, boldest, and most overlooked opportunities for Canadian businesses. Trade with Africa. I'm Susan Namulindwa, AI, Executive Director of the Africa Trade Desk, and I'll walk you through the economic potential, the common misconceptions, and most importantly, the concrete steps we've built to help you succeed. Whether you're just curious or ready to expand, this session is your launch pad. So let's dive in and discover what's possible. Did you know Africa has the fastest growing economies on the planet? By 2045, it'll be the world's fastest urbanizing region, bigger than China or India. Canada's export opportunities there are massive, folks, but we've barely scratched the surface. Opportunities knocking loud and clear. Let's fling that door wide open. Now, I know some of you have concerns. Let's tackle them head on. I hear it all the time. Too complicated, too dangerous, too slow. I don't have connections. I don't know where to start. I don't have the resources. Sound familiar? These are excuses, folks. And excuses are the nails that build the house of failure. It's time to tear it down and build a bridge to success. So, how do we do that? Africa Trade Desk has the answer. That's why Africa Trade Desk is here, friends. We believe trade is the spark that ignites economic growth. Our mission: to supercharge trade between Canada and Africa by building the biggest Afro-Canadian business ecosystem around. We're finding opportunities, vetting partners, securing funding, speeding things up, and cutting risks. We're your ladder to the top. And we've got a powerhouse team behind us. Picture this: 75 African businesses, 25 Canadian companies, 750 diaspora members, 10 government institutions, 15 service providers, lawyers, advisors, logistics pros, and 5 financial partners, all pulling together with one goal: growth. This isn't just a network, it's a rocket ship to success. Curious what we bring to the table? Listen up. We've got solutions for every hurdle. Don't know where to start? Our strategy development gives you market insights and trends. No connections. Business development hooks you up with opportunities and influencers. Too slow or risky? Risk management and project support, on-the-ground help and training, keep you safe and fast. We've got your back. And the process: simple as pie. Here's how it works. Step 1. Enroll in our ecosystem. Get vetted and join the family. Step 2. Define your project. We'll match you with the right partners. Step 3. Execute with our support. It's like a GPS for your business. No deeders, no dead ends. So what's stopping you? The opportunity's here, the support's here. Let's grab it together. You don't have to be great to start, but you've got to start to be great. Let's take that first step today and make history. Sign up for our ecosystem. Visit africatradedesk.com or email us at contact@africatradedesk.com to enroll today.
You had the girl, so nobody competes with her. I'll call up Paula to set us up for the next program. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Susan. Wow, I've never been right after an AI, so I don't know. Those were some really, really nice little clips and sayings. I'm going to have to watch that again. So good afternoon, everyone, Your Excellencies, esteemed guests, and all protocols observed. Welcome back. And I hope you all enjoyed the insightful session we had on Canada's trade at a crossroads, led by our esteemed Director of International Policy at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. The conversation was incredibly thought-provoking as we were given an expose into the shifting global trade dynamics and Canada's place within them. Of course, tomorrow we'd have an extra slide on that, I guess. We're waiting till 4 p.m. to see what else is shifting on us. But we also had, of course, the privilege of hearing from such a distinguished panel afterwards, which gave us a really diverse and a global perspective on Canada's trade relations, and especially with regions like Africa and Asia, Mexico, and the world at large. The richness of the discussion and the questions afterward actually really highlighted where people are worried and where we will need more support, which actually, Susan, your video captured a lot of those questions and answered it by saying, sign up for Africa Trade Desk. So, and you might be able to get some answers, and especially the support that Susan and her team always give. One key point that stood out from today's talks, of course, is that urgent need for that more strategic approach to trade diversification, and especially towards Africa. As we know, Africa holds immense potential with its growing economies, young populations, and increasing demands for goods and services. And Canada's role in this emerging market is not just a possibility, and those of you who've known me for a few years, you know, it's the same story, but this time it's just not a possibility. It really is a necessity. We really must diversify. And I know we sometimes takes the easy route, which is just dealing with our southern partners. It's actually a lot easier to do the cross-border trade than to do the interprovincial trade, which was always one of my buggy-boos there when I was with Global Affairs Canada. And I also want to thank, so I won't go down that path because interprovincial barriers, I think, is something that is now front and center. I'm looking to my trade policy colleagues over there, of course, when I say that. But we'll go back to our moderator for the panel, Gareth Bloor. He's the president of the Canada-Africa Chamber of Business, who shared valuable insights into the opportunities and challenges that we face in forging stronger trade relationships with Africa. And we have worked, and well, he recognized me. I was sitting there. I'm the chair of the Canada-Africa Chamber of Business now, retired. But you see, like Georgina, we don't really retire, right? With the Chamber, we've worked across dozens of African markets like Kenya, South Africa, DRC, Zimbabwe, and Côte d'Ivoire. And that was just in the last not even 18 months. And coming up, we're going to Namibia, Zambia, Tanzania, Mauritius, and hopefully Angola. We do all of this with the Trade Commissioner Service that was mentioned several times. They're instrumental on the ground for all of us. And then for this panel, we heard from a very impressive VP of the Asia Pacific Foundation. I want her as a VP of our Africa Foundation one day. I think that will do the trick. And of course, our president, our dear friend of foreign investment and trade with Mexico. Their perspectives on the shifting trade landscape were very, very interesting and eye-opening. Some of you know I did work in Mexico as the head Minister Counselor of Trade, Mexico-Canada relations. And it's very important for us to continue to foster and to strengthen our partnership between Mexico and Canada right now. Of course, we also had the privilege of hearing from our trade commissioners and our Trade Commissioner Service from Global Affairs Canada, who emphasized Canada's commitment to expanding our international reach while ensuring that all is done with a firm grounding in diplomacy and sustainable development. And I must say that we have two people here in the room, and it will answer some of the questions. We have the Trade Facilitation Office. We have Stephen Tippman here with his colleagues. And they do have some funding from GAC. And they work with the TCS, but to help companies import into Canada. So somebody had asked that question, so it's Trade Facilitation Office. And of course, we have Catalyst Plus that we've worked with for many, many years, and they help SMEs get ready to go and diversify internationally. And that's Wendy Harris. So those two you can talk to at the next break as well. So now as we pivot as we pivot to the next phase of our event, it's my honor to pass the microphone to our moderator for the next panel discussion of how trade works. This session will continue to build on the conversations we've had so far, offering a more practical and hands-on perspective on the mechanics of global trade and how we as a nation can navigate these changing dynamics to our advantage, of course. So with that, please join me in welcoming our moderator and panelists for this next session. Our moderator is Deepak Dave. He's a friend of many years of the Canada-Africa Business Chamber. He was on our board, he's on our advisory council, he's still a dear friend. And we enjoy seeing him. He represents us as well. So thank you for being here. He has spent over 25 years working on investment banking transactions across multiple African locations. And gosh, you worked everywhere, I think, in Kenya, in England, in Canada, and you were previously at EDC. Oh, so maybe you can talk about that EDC lower rate there, and institutions that are allied to the African Development Bank. And of course, you'll introduce a panel more fully. So I look forward to this continued exchange. Thank you very much, Deepak.
Any of the old EDC staff in this room started laughing when she talked about the lowered rate, because that was the bane of our lives when we were at EDC. Why can't we get financing for free? First question, always, always. It's a $5 billion company, $5 million company, same question. It's why can't we get the money for free? It's a privilege to be here today, and the panelists I'm about to introduce, it's wonderful to have a chance to listen to all of them. As soon as Victoria and Susan told me I'd have a chance to meet with all of you today, I rushed out, I borrowed this suit from my neighbor, and I just made my way down here. So, allow me to introduce a highly distinguished panel that is going to talk about how trade works. The first person, Georgina Wainwright-Kemdirim. Georgina, please. Yes. I love the award ceremony aspect of this. Georgina has spent 35 years with the public service, almost all of it at Global Affairs Canada, is still an instructor at the Canadian Foreign Service Institute, and is the Vice President of the Ottawa chapter, or Vice President for Policy of the Ottawa chapter of the Organization of Women in International Trade. Georgina spent a number of years as the lead negotiator and implementer of chapters on gender, Indigenous people's rights, and SME financing in trade agreements that Canada signed. And I'm sure she'll talk more about some of those experiences in a few moments. Our next panelist is Vincent Nguyen. Vincent, please. He is the CEO and founder of Business Global Intelligence, based here in Ottawa, and does a fantastic job utilizing his very long experience across multiple countries of strategizing trade solutions, but also financing packages and executing. That was a word he used earlier with me, and I thought that really hit hard. He executes deals for Canadian exporters that want to do business overseas and for foreign companies that want to do business in Canada, and I look forward to listening to him as well. Jennifer McMullen from the Royal Bank of Canada. She's the Director of Senior Commercial Markets, an old EDC colleague of mine, and I'm delighted that she's here today because she's going to talk to us about the work she does structuring working capital solutions and banking transactions for exporters from Canada. Jesse Mitchell is an expert in logistics, warehouse operations, customs brokerage for exporters working, I think, not just across the border, but across the world with Trade Affairs here in Canada, and is going to be followed by Efosa Obano. There he is, who is, I'm sorry. Efosa is the founder of the Black Founders Network and the African Impact Initiative, and helps companies that work with marginalized communities at the nexus of technology, capital, and innovation to achieve scalable economic impact. He previously worked on has been recognized for this by a number of organizations here in Canada, and previously was with Dell Canada, if I understand correctly. And I look forward particularly to hearing what he has to say. So shall we start out with Georgina first? Georgina, would you like to stay there, or? Yeah, good.
Is that working? Hello?
Oh, it's working. Oh, what did you do?
Magic.
Okay, hi everyone.
Thank you for the introduction. I'm Georgina Wainwright Kimdiram. Today I am representing the Organization for Women in International Trade, the Ottawa chapter, and I'm going to call that OWIT from now on. I want to begin my little presentation today by just noting some important data for your consideration. Worldwide, women own 36% of small businesses, but they are only represented in about 15 to 20% in terms of exporting companies. And that data comes from the International Trade Center. That data is not great, but in Canada, it's worse. In Canada, as of 2020 data from StatCan, 17% of SMEs in Canada are owned by women, but only 11% of that 17% export. Now that's gone up significantly in the last 10 years. It was 5% and it's 11% now. But the point is, there's huge challenges here, but there's also huge opportunities. And that's what OWIT is all about. We're here to leverage those opportunities and promote them. So Canada, I should say OWIT, we firmly believe that trade diversification is not only about where we trade and what we trade, but who trades and who benefits from trade. And we focus at OWIT on diverse women, including Indigenous women, disabled women, BIPOC women. We want to support all women in expanding their trade globally. So OWIT, where does OWIT come from? OWIT was established in 1989. That's a long time ago. In Washington, D.C., that was the first one. They're now known as the International Chapter. There's 30 chapters around the world, including 10 in Africa. There's 2 in Canada, Ottawa and Toronto. The Ottawa chapter was established in 2010. And even though these 2 chapters are based in central Canada, we have 2,500 members from across the whole country. So we are a national organization, and we would like to expand OWIT chapters across Canada, but also around the world. We have no chapters in the Indo-Pacific region, and I feel like there could be an opportunity there, given the Indo-Pacific strategy. But we have a lot of chapters in Africa, which is really great. Some of the partners that we work with here in with OWIT Ottawa and OWIT Toronto include Export Development Canada, Farm Credit Canada, the Forum for International Trade Training, and the Trade Facilitation Office Canada, TFOC. I did want to note that we are very active in the work that we do. So what do? We are about supporting women's participation in trade through mentoring, through networking, through training and education programs. It's really about women supporting women, but we like to have men come out too and support and engage with us. I do want to note that our last several networking sessions were sold out events. The last one, we actually had the Invest Ottawa president, Sonia Shorey, speaking to our organization about what's going on supporting Ottawa and women in Ottawa, women founders in the context of what we're facing with the US right now. We also do a lot of advocacy to the government on trade policy issues, and we have spoken to the Trade Committee at the House of Commons on Parliament Hill. We advise Global Affairs Canada on important aspects on trade policy and trade agreements. We are also on the W7 this year. The W7 is a civil society group of women from around the world, developing recommendations for G7 leaders. And as you know, this year, Canada is the head of G7, and we're putting together a package. And from what we're trying to do on the OWIT side is ensure that women, traders, women business owners, are supported and recognized for the value they can bring to Canada's economy and the global economy, and ensure that tariffs don't disproportionately affect them, or the response packages that governments will put in place don't disproportionately affect women. So I think my time, I have 2 more minutes? Okay, great. Okay. So, yeah, so I wanted to go back to the fact that we have all these chapters around the world and just, highlight the ones in Africa since, Africa seems to be a focus here today. We do have 10 chapters there, and they are incredibly active. They're involved in ensuring that the women business owners are transitioning from the informal to the formal economy, and they target professional women, and they focus on different sectors, and they bring in leaders in different sectors and different economies to really facilitate African women's participation in the business and in the trade. They're doing amazing work, and they're really ensuring that they respond to the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, this agreement of 50 countries in Africa to facilitate free trade in the region. So they do a lot of this training and mentoring, ensuring gender barriers are removed for women's participation in the mining sector, for example, or the manufacturing sector. Yeah, so I think I'll leave it there as a good example of what OWIT is all about. But I really would like to encourage all of you to come out to our events, maybe become a member, follow us on LinkedIn, and let's ensure that we can harness the value that women in Canada and around the world can bring to the global economy and trade. Okay, thank you. Okay.
Thank you so much, Georgina. Allow me to welcome Vincent Nguyen from Business Global Intelligence. He also happens to be a lyricist and songwriter, so the very powerful music you heard during the break that was encouraging international trade and being willing to take risks was actually written and set to music by Vincent himself. I wanted to bring this up earlier, but I did forget. So, Vincent, please.
Thank you. Thank you, Deepak, for a very nice introduction. Yes, I created that song specifically for this event, basically to highlight the strength and the ambition of Canada to go be, like a true trading nation, right? Anyway, so very briefly, my name is Vincent. I've been in this international business for many, many years, over 3 decades. I used to be working for a couple of very big multinational banks and involved in international trade. And here in Canada, I had altogether probably over 10 years working with RBC and BMO also in the trade finance area. So trade finance and trade, international trade is always very close to my heart. Okay, I just want to quickly show something. I know that we talked a lot about this in the previous section. I just want to quickly show this to show how much we talk about the over-reliance on the U.S. markets, and this actually come up as something that we try to avoid now. People mention about the very own wisdom saying, we don't put all eggs in one basket, but you can see how many, eggs we put in the U.S. basket. It's a figurative speech because actually we didn't literally ship a lot of eggs to the U.S. Even in, during the very recent egg crisis in the US, we didn't really ship a lot of eggs to them, so it's a figurative speech. Again, you might not be able to see this. I just want to quickly show this list because I will bring it up at the later part of my presentation about, this is the list of products we actually shipping to the US and buying from the US, right? I just want to bring them up to show that many of those products can be sourced from outside the US or can be sold outside the US. So it's just a quick reminder that US is not the only market that we have to be relied on. So I want to quickly talk a little bit about what you heard in the first presentation, the first panel. People mentioned about Vina mentioned about the Indo-Pacific strategy, and the Trade Commission has also mentioned about the Indo-Pacific strategy, and they open up a lot of new offices in that region. I just want to quickly say that ASEAN is, we talk about Indo-Pacific region, and ASEAN is a group of 10 nations actually play a very important role in that strategy, because ASEAN, as you can see some stats here, is actually a very dynamic region, high growth region, and including some countries, like Singapore. And that is very great market that we should be focusing on. And again, Canada has done a lot of things to increase trade with ASEAN. And I just try to bring it up again, just kind of reiterate that the interest that a lot of people, a lot of the panelists already talked about in the previous session. I want to bring this up. It's kind of very interesting. We talk about the Indo-Pacific strategy. We talk about ASEAN. And maybe a lot of you here might not have heard about something even bigger, the RCEP, right? It's the newest kids on the block, the largest trading bloc in the world. As you can see, it kind of comparing the sizes of different trading blocks, and it's bigger than USMCA, bigger than the EU. Maybe some of you might have wondered what it is, the AFCTA, back there. So if you haven't known, that stands for the African Continent Free Trade Area, which actually the largest free trade region in the world by the number of countries. It's connect 1.3 billion people across 55 markets in Africa, right? So again, I want to relate to the previous session that some panelists point out and to respond to some question that we don't have to focus only on the bigger market. And that's another thing, like we talk about that a little bit in the Q&A, but people ask a question about where should I go, right? And of course you go to those bigger markets, but the thing is, bigger markets also means it's very crowded. There's a lot of competition, right? So sometimes it makes sense to aim for the smaller sort of markets. And to be very honest, Africa is a kind of overlooked market for Canada. Like China, for example, made a lot of money trading with Africa, right? So it doesn't mean that it's something we should overlook. And I'm glad that we talked today about the African market is one of the main focuses that should get the attention of Canadian businesses. Again, I just want to speak a little bit about a particular country, a little bit biased because I came from that country originally. So, but there's a reason for that, and not just because I'm Vietnamese, I bring it up. But it's basically you can see some stats here that actually Vietnam is among ASEAN the largest trading partner of Canada at this time, right? And again, there's all these good things I put up there to tell you why this is one of the things that should be on the radar. Now, I want to bring up again very quickly a few slides about what we actually currently export to Vietnam and import from Vietnam, right? The lists are there not really for you to really take a detailed analysis. It's mostly to, like I said, if you compare this list with the list we trading with the US, you can see that a lot of products in the two lists going to be similar. So again, Vietnam, ASEAN, or Indo-Pacific can be a very good alternative. I'm not saying we're replacing the US, of course we can't. But it's more like we try to diversify the markets and try to be less dependent on a particular market, right? Well, again, this is something that I just bring up, for the sake of having some specific examples of what kind of products that would be a good demand. But like some people mentioned in the previous panel, there's no limitation in terms of what products it would be appealing to the market. It's just a matter of how can you access a market, how you position yourself. And most importantly, we talk about that hopefully in the Q&A, like what do my team can help? Like my team work very closely with the trade commissioner. For example, we heard about trade commissioner's presentation. They help you to a certain extent, but you need somebody to actually help you to execute the plan and to get all the necessary local relationships and local expertise to sort out a lot of challenges, of the international trade. Like international trade is very fascinating, but it's also very complicated. So I would stop my presentation here, and I hope that we can address, and I will be happy to answer a lot of your questions during the Q&A session. So thank you so much for listening, and it's a pleasure to be here among you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Vincent. That was fascinating. I hadn't realized about the global trade blocs and the relative market shares. So Jennifer, perhaps you could come and talk to us a little bit about how RBC helps finance some of this fantastic trade.
So I do not have a presentation, but I figure I do this every day. can't be that hard. So I feel like I'm with my people. Like when people ask how did I end up here, I took international business and finance at Sprott School of Business. And what do I do every day? International business banking. So, you know, some of those people that end up in the jobs, and this is where I'm at. So what I do on an everyday basis is deal with Canadian companies. The other interesting stuff I've learned is I chose the companies that are domiciled in Ontario, so I don't ever get to travel for work. Like, I never get to go to fun places. I only deal with the owners out here in like Renfrew, Peterborough, Cobourg. These are the exciting towns I get to go to. So, you know, this is a really tough time to be a banker. You know, it happened with COVID. We feel like we're just gotten through that. It happened with staffing and employment and not having enough people to run your factories and your businesses. And now we're hitting these tariffs and this uncertainty. And what the number one thing I hear a lot from my customers and customers I'm meeting with, they can't make business decisions because there's so much uncertainty. Like, you know, if we just knew what it was gonna look like and how long it was gonna happen, like I have some customers that they export 98% to the US. He can handle it for like, he said 15, 20% tariffs, I could probably do 3-6 months. If we can resolve this and come back to something normal, I can handle it. If this is the new norm, then I'm going to have to ship my entire business overseas, and what does that look like? So it's a really hard time, especially to be on a banker, because what I do is I facilitate payments, which nothing has affected that, but I also help clients identify and manage their risks. And right now, where historically I would have looked at your receivable listing of your clients and been like, oh my gosh, you have 70% to one customer. What happens if that customer like goes bankrupt? Like that's a huge concentration risk. Now we're looking at these same receivable listings going, oh my gosh, 80% of that is to the US. What are you gonna do? Like, what are you gonna look like in 6 months? What are your financials gonna look like? So it's another layer that businesses are trying to operate on that, and what our mandate has been at the bank, and I work there, I've been there 3 years. Previous to that, I worked at HSBC, one of the global banks, so international trade and cross-border banking was our selling point. And so what we're doing now is we're on the first wave. We're calling clients proactively, like, what is your experience? How are you gonna be affected? I have one gentleman up in Peterborough. He sells feed to lobster fishermen in Maine, and he is a trader, and he is just cutting that business line. Like, his margin is so thin as it was that he's like, I'm not even gonna fight my suppliers and my customers to fight with that right now. I'm just gonna focus on other areas of my business. So it's a very diverse, so I have construction companies that aren't affected, right? And so our number one rollout right now is talking to our clients, finding out, having a list of who's affected. The other thing that we're doing, which I think everyone is doing, is tons of information. So if you ever go on the RBC website, you'll see we have a thought, it's called it's a think tank where it's like John Stackhouse from the Globe and Mail, and all he does is issue papers of, you know, industries and countries you can go to. We have the RBC Global Collect where you can actually click, I tried it last night. You click on your industry and the product you have, and you put your country that you want to go to, and it tells you what your odds of like landing that. So we're not a trade commissioner, but we are helping our customers in that respect. The other thing that Georgina brought up to me, and I was thinking that too, so my background is actually EDC and BDC as well. So I did giggle, like, yeah, no, market rates. I think that's a great idea. If anyone wants to bring it up to the CEO of EDC, I'm sure they'll get a big list of lobbyists. But we were thinking this too, is like, as a banker, I rely on EDC for export transactions. They insure my receivables. So right now, I'll give any client their receivable listing in North America. I'll treat it as Canadian. Anywhere in North America, I'll treat it as Canadian. As soon as you start selling to Vietnam or Ireland, it's a foreign receivable, and I need EDC insurance for that. So there is ways to de-risk the sales. Does it protect you 100%? No, but I do think if you follow the insurance policy and you give the right credit terms, if they don't pay you, there is a mechanism to get paid. The other one is their EDC guarantee program. Here I am sharing that. But if there's a new industry and you're looking to export and you need more working capital, and your bank is, you're already kind of like your limits of where you need to go with your bank, we have an EGP product that helps transfer the risk and share in that. So we have that. We have that inside of RBC where we can automatically, you can apply for that and get that going. The other one I'm going to give a hint for is FCC lately has been amazing. They have been doing so much. Like they have a former EDCer running them, Justine Hendricks. I have customers that are breweries, that they're getting acquisition lending and terms from FCC that are very competitive. So if you know anyone that's anywhere along that food, like if you're a truck that has food on it, they'll help you. So that's my plug for that. And the last thing I'll just kind of say is, I don't know if anyone knows this, but RBC did buy HSBC Bank a year ago. We've had a year in the trading. It's been officially, we had a big celebration yesterday. And I think with that said, RBC is really focused on external, being the leading global bank in transactions and really helping you open up foreign accounts in other countries. Right now, I'm opening up a lot of accounts south of the border so they can pay the tariffs. Nobody thought about that right away. So I've had an influx of going from like 6 accounts a day to like 20 accounts that they're opening just so you can pay your tariff when you hit the border, right? So there's a lot of changes. It's never easy to be a banker. One of the number one comments is always, if we only had the financing. I get it. You know, what I will say is banks lend on cash flow. If you can prove sustainable, stable cash flow, a bank is going to support you, right? It's the problems when you've been up and down, and then you go and take on a new risk. That's where we lean on the EDCs, the FCCs, and the BDCs to kind of help us out. So it's a whole new day. We're waiting for 4 o'clock, I swear. He better be on time. So I'll leave it at that.
I think we'd have a lot of fun unpacking some of those. One thing I would point out, somebody asked earlier about institutions in country in some of the regions. I know for a fact Africa and Asia, because I've worked in both, and the Middle East, sorry, all 3 of them, and I assume it's the same for Latin America and the Caribbean. There are institutions locally owned by multiple governments that mirror what EDC, BDC, CCC, FCC all do. Sometimes they're called banks, sometimes they're called agencies, sometimes they're called funds, but they are also multi-country. They often tend to have a very high credit rating, and they're equally good structurally at de-risking transactions. They're not very well known here in Canada, but in Europe and all, they make extensive use of these institutions. So there's help out there that may not be as obvious. And on that note, I'd like to ask Jesse to come and walk us through some of the logistics and warehousing of how trade happens.
Thanks a lot. The last guest said it was tough to be a banker lately. I'm a customs broker. So when the president of my company found out I was going to come today, he said, "You picked today as the day to leave the office." So it's been challenging times for sure. I work for Straight Affairs International. We're a 72-year-old customs broker in Canada and the United States, warehousing, 3PL, and e-commerce distribution company. So we're an hour down the road in Ogdensburg, New York, and then on the Canadian side in Prescott and Brockville, Ontario. And when we took a look just recently at the over 400 local companies in Eastern Ontario that we work with, we found that a significant portion, over 50% of them, only import from the US and China. And it's mostly, when I speak to them, because of laziness. When a Canadian company can order product from an American supplier, they get that product in 5 days, maybe a week. When they look to Indonesia to order maybe the same product, it takes 2 months. That needs to change in the Canadian marketplace. Canadian importers need to realize that by importing from overseas, from India, South America, Mexico, all the different areas that we've talked about today, you can often find the same product that you're buying from an American company or even from a Chinese company, but it's going to be cheaper. That's the thing. Everyone says, "Oh, I'll buy from an American company because it's easy." Call up somebody in Mexico. They're probably making the same product and you can get it at a better price. And I consult with companies all the time using Import Genius and or Panjiva. These are powerful tools that companies can use to find that supplier overseas. So these databases online give you access to ocean import data of any ocean shipment that's existed essentially in the last 10 years. So let's say there's an American company that you buy from right now, and they've got a supplier in China, and you want to find that supplier, and you want to buy from them directly. You can plug in the information to Panjiva, and it will show you your competitors name all of the ocean import shipments that they've ever had in a 10-year period, including the supplier's name, the commodities that they've imported. It seems like it should be secret data because it used to be. About 10 years ago, the US government allowed this data to be sold to private companies who then conglomerate the data and put it into tools like this. And when I consult with companies who are looking for new suppliers overseas, I point them to this tool. Not that I use the tool with them because they don't know how to use it, and it makes me look really good. But there's tools online that companies can use to find, hey, you know what, I'm importing this from China. I want to see what other companies around the world are producing this product. You can find that information online. I also wanted to talk about improved government communications. I help companies all the time start their businesses in Canada. And there's a company I'm working with right now. They're from Indonesia. They submitted their application for their business registration in Canada the second week of November, and it's still not approved. They also submitted that application the only way that you can in Canada, which is by fax. And the fax got scrambled. So for the first 2 weeks, they're waiting to reply back from the Canadian government, and they called them up, and the Canadian government said, we didn't get your registration. And on top of that, the Canadian government only has a 1-800 number that you can call, which is only open Eastern Standard Time, 9 to 4 p.m. So this company in Indonesia is like, why do I want to do business in Canada? It's so difficult, which is why so many US and international companies choose not to do business here. There would be more small, medium companies around the world investing in Canada if we made it easier for them to do so. This company in Indonesia said to me, what are the packaging requirements and language laws in Canada? What about product registration? Because they have some electronic products that need to be registered in Canada. There's no effective way for them to go to a government website that tells them, here is how you become a registered business in Canada and do business in the country. So they say, well, we'll hire a consultant, which is going to cost $100,000. And they're like, we're not going to do that. Jesse, help me figure this out. So that's where I try and point them as best as I can, but the Canadian government needs to be doing a much better job at making our market accessible to international companies to bring in their products, to use my warehouse so that we can hire employees. The company that sent their information in November, if their business was registered, they'd be paying taxes. We'd probably hire 2 employees just to service their business. Canada needs to do a better job in this area, certainly. And then last is a niche business opportunity because of the trade tariffs that Trump has put on. So if you're a US company and you import from China, during Trump's first administration, he put tariffs on Chinese products between 7.5% and 25%. So most textiles, for example, from China have 25% tariff and 18% duty. There's an additional 20% that he's just put on in the last 2 months. So you're talking 60% plus tariff and duty to import this jacket from China. So if it costs $100 at the factory, you import it into America, you have to pay the US government $60 just because there's a trade war happening. Canadian companies can be using Panjiva to look at US companies who are selling a significant amount of their inventory into the Canadian marketplace, particularly if they're importing it from China. Because then that same Canadian company with Panjiva can say, all right, I'm going to contact that supplier in China directly and import to Canada and block out my US supplier, and suddenly the product is going to be 40% less in tariff. Canada has no tariff for China. Huge opportunity for Canadian companies to cut out the American middleman and be working directly with companies in China, and not just China, but around the world. America has high tariffs that are going in place in about an hour on a lot of other countries. This is a great opportunity. I've done a bunch of consulting with companies locally specifically on this. And the margins that they can make, often you would look at it and, do I have another minute? Okay. So they'll often say to me, well, I can't import from the Chinese company because I'm only going to import half a container. And the company in America is going to import 100 containers. The Chinese company is obviously going to sell to you at a higher price, but they're not going to sell to you at a 40% increase due to the tariff in terms of the price they'll give to you. So a Canadian company can still order smaller quantities, bring it into Canada, and just maybe manage the Canadian market in a better way than they're currently doing right now. So there's lots of opportunities for Canadians to take advantage of this trade war. They just need to think about it in a different way. So that's it.
As Jesse pointed out, there's more than one way to solve for this, and the opportunities that he's talking about are absolutely very real. As an African diaspora member, I always struggle with the fact that brothers and sisters who've started businesses here in Canada, it's difficult enough for them to break into the market, but then the creative and knowledge edge that they have about markets back home can't really get taken advantage of, because when they're in a marginalized community, it's very difficult to scale up their business no matter how good the idea. So I'd like to hear from Afosa about how some of the work that he does can enable those things to happen more easily.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you to the Africa Trade Desk team for having me as well. So my name is Afosa Obano. I grew up in Nigeria, where I was born and raised, and I moved to Canada 12 years ago. And I moved here for a better life, because Nigeria, where I grew up, the conditions were very different from the conditions here. And that has shaped a lot of the work that I've gone on to do, by the grace of God, with my two organizations. So I started the Black Founders Network, which is the other hat I wear. I'm not going to be talking about that today, but we invest in Black-led companies in Canada, a lot of which are of African descent. The hat I'm wearing today is on the African Impact side, which I also started supporting African innovation, both here in Canada, but also on the continent. So just a quick snapshot of our journey so far before diving into the conversation with African Impact specifically. We've been able to raise roughly $6 million, all Canadian capital from University of Toronto and Dell Canada, where I used to work before, and also the MasterCard Foundation. And this has powered the work we've done supporting African innovators with training, with capital, with capacity building, and we've gotten some recognition doing this as well. We also prioritize the creation of jobs and skill development as a sort of equalizer with entrepreneurship, because we also see that there's a big opportunity there to solve those challenges while we're creating jobs through entrepreneurship. But more specifically on the conversation we're having right now on Canada-Africa trade, I think the timing, why now, it's very clear from a lot of what my colleagues on the panel said prior, and the changes that are about to happen literally in an hour. But I think there's been a huge spike in population growth of the African community in Canada over the last 20 years. We've seen a lot of immigration from different parts of Africa, and we have now very plugged-in communities, across the continent in Canada. There's also been a lot of effort from the Canadian government to support the Africa Free Trade Agreement. I worked very closely with the Friends at the African Union and Minister Hussein, and Canada has been supporting that from afar, and we're one of the only countries outside Africa who's actually been engaged in this, so that presents a huge opportunity as well. The Africa Strategy, which was launched, I know a lot of people are not very happy about how high level it was, and it could be a lot more detailed, but it does present a foundation as well to build on this. And finally, the growth in the African market is clear for everyone to see, so there's huge opportunities there with the growth. I think it's important, though, when we're trying to engage with Africa, to look at things from the perspective of win-win outcomes. For too long, Africa has been treated more as an extractive partner and not a mutually economic partner. And there's a lot of tensions we have to navigate when we're trying to figure out how do we trade with Africa now that the opportunity has arisen. So the first thing that we're going to try to sort of emphasize is the need to collaborate effectively, even with the private sector players. I'm just one tiny slice of the pie. I have some colleagues here, my friend Dara, who's also leading a fund that's investing in agriculture, and tons of other friends who are leading funds. We've been doing our work in silos before, and this has brought us together. And I think we have an opportunity now to combine our capital and invest in a unified way, targeting key sectors. This also presents us with the opportunity to work closely with the government as partners, and I think we should take advantage of that for sure. The other thing that's also important to note in terms of examples of win-win outcomes that are being created right now, I'm going to speak to both on the screen. So those are two companies that we've supported specifically. Two companies we supported specifically that I can speak to what they do. At the top is a company called MyDesk. So they create desks which are made out of sustainable packaged materials And they provide these desks, not really desks, but they're like wheelie school bags that can be transformed into desks. They provide these to students in rural African countries who do not have access to desks. You'll be surprised how many there are that do not have access to these desks. These desks have the ability to be solar charged as well and provide the students with alternatives in their schools. Talita, we're one of the first people to invest in Talita, and this product was built using Canadian intelligence, Canadian technology, and right now my desk has been provided to over 4,300 students in South Africa. She's made over $1 million as well doing this, and we've seen this literally start from scratch and scale. Already the company below, Nigerian company as well, it's a product that provides solar energy to middle-income and low-income households in rural Africa as well. So they have this Ready capsule, which actually was spun out of University of Toronto, and we invested in them as well. And this capsule helps to provide energy to families for, I think, less than $1 a day. Olu has also made over $1 million. They're currently serving 10,000 households right now, and we're an early investor in this company. So these are just two examples of products that are built with Canadian intelligence, Canadian support, but are serving the needs of African communities in a way that's not extractive, but in a way that's actually driving economic impact. So we've seen with our approach that the companies that tend to do this best are those who are able to actually provide economic agency for their customers and do this profitably in the context of the African market. And we've also seen that these companies then have a potential to scale beyond just Africa because there's other countries and other regions that have these needs. So we call it market creating innovations for anyone who's kind of curious about the concept. And there's a book called The Prosperity Paradox that was written that really informs this strategy that you can also check out. In terms of the trade volume that's already happening at the top, as you can see, there's billions of dollars already being traded between Canada and Africa. And specifically in 2023, over $1 billion was sent. The challenge, though, as big as these numbers seem, in the grand scheme of things, and I think someone mentioned it earlier, we're doing way less than the global number. China's making so much money from trading with Africa. Europe is making so much money as well. So as much as we've started the effort with Africa, I think a lot more can be done, and a lot more can be done in a way that's mutually beneficial. So looking forward, how I think we can get it right, echoing what I said before, I think those of us that are already in the field working in silos, we should partner more effectively together, and we should work with our friends from all the Cs, the EDCs, the BDCs, and I think the challenge with those big organizations or even like GAC is, the red tape and the bureaucracy doesn't allow them to move as quickly as we can move in the private sector. So I think there should be more collaboration in an effective way. As you can see in the pictures, I've had the opportunity to work closely with very influential people who also see the need for this. And as part of the consultations that informed the Africa strategy, with the AU's past chairperson, Honorable Faki, and Melanie Jolie from Foreign Affairs, with Ahmed Hussein, with Mark, who might be our next president. So these folks all get it on a macro level, but I think there's action that needs to be taken on the field that needs to back them with speed. So I think that's one key strategy. I think in addition to that, we should also be prioritizing, recognizing the fact that Africa, we call it an Africa strategy, but Africa is not one country. There's different cultures, different countries, and different approaches that need to be taken. So having this in our approach is going to be critical to success. We should also recognize the fact that, sorry, my slides. Yes, that documentation and decentralization of information is critical. I loved the last presentation, that supplier database he shared. I think we need something like that for the African market as well, for people who are trying to see, how can I do this, how can I do that? A lot of the risk and the fear is coming from lack of access to data and facts. There's so much that's already happening, and I think if we do a better job at documenting that, it's also going to reduce the risk that we see. Finally, with the African Impact Fund, which is the vehicle that we use to do this work, it is a fund that has the vision of really trying to create an Africa that's going to be free from poverty, because that's going to happen. Might not be in our lifetimes, but we want to start the work in doing that. So that's a big driving force for us. And with the African Impact Challenge, which is the AIC program that we've run with the $6 million we've raised so far, we've learned a lot of hard lessons about what needs to be changed and how things can be improved. So that's what's going to be backing the thesis of this fund. And we're actually in the process of closing a $30 million Fund 1 for this, which is going to be doubling down on the same set of thesis and values. It is driven by my faith, so Efosa in Nigerian language means God's wealth. And I really feel like I have a purpose that has been sort of driven by that as well. I have a few more slides, but I think I'm probably almost at time, which sort of show some of the work we've done on the continent. So we've done this program and funding in Ghana specifically in 2020, in Kenya in 2021, in Rwanda in 2022, in South Africa in 2023, and in Botswana last year. So I'll be happy to speak to any of these during the Q&A section as well. And thank you guys so much again for having us.
What an inspiring and powerful talk. I'm sure we're going to take some questions, but one thing I'll just quickly point out, if any of the panelists would like their presentation to be distributed to the attendees today, that can be arranged. I know a couple of you had to rush a little bit through them. That shouldn't be difficult to manage. So, questions for the panel? I believe there's, I'm sorry, do I pick? Do you? You have the power. I mean, okay. So why don't we start with our gentleman here and then, oh, sorry, yes, of course. If I could ask you to introduce yourself and then perhaps talk about which of the panelists particularly you'd like to answer your question, or whether it's open to the entire panel. We'll take 3 and then hand the mic back to the panel. So
I'll choose you two.
Thank you. Cornelius Babalola is my name. About 10 years ago, we approached Rogers Canada to come and invest in Nigeria. And Rogers told us that, no, I cannot go there because of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 problems. Today, the telecommunication business in Nigeria is valued at $10.24 billion US dollars. Rogers missed that completely. Good announcement. Canada launches its first global Africa strategy. Wow, that was really good. But it brings a challenge to every one of us that is in the diaspora. The biggest challenge for Africans in respect of this strategy is it lacks a very strong implementation frameworks. That meaningful framework includes diaspora's communities. While the strategy acknowledges African importance, there are several key gaps. Limited diaspora engagement. How does Canada engage the African in diaspora? The African diaspora in Canada, we have a very significant expertise, networks, and financial influence. But the strategy does not integrate that into their plan. Limited engagement, very weak private sector focus. Canada's engagement with Africa remains heavily government-led, with limited emphasis on fostering the private sector partnership, which could drive real economic impact. Can anyone address this as it's a very great challenge to Africans in the diaspora?
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry, there was one question up here.
Hello, my name is Mohammed. I work with the One Campaign, and as a African here in Canada, I was born and raised in Morocco. And paying attention particularly to Jesse's presentation, I was wondering whether one way to alleviate the obstacles would be putting in some sort of package explaining how to take advantage of all the crown corporations, whether it's the CCC, EDC, FCC, and just helping entrepreneurs and SMEs here in Canada navigating exports and imports. And would that be possible as well to target these communities, whether it's women entrepreneurs or African women entrepreneurs leading here in Canada in order to lead the way one way or another?
I think
Do
there
we
was
have a
one
third one?
more. Anybody online?
No?
Very well.
Let's
So-
go with those then.
Okay, so Jesse, and then perhaps I'd open it to the broader panel, particularly Fosa. Thank you, but Jesse, go ahead. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Hello? There we go. Yeah, the Canadian government should have a central location where somebody can go to understand what they need to do to be a registered business in Canada outside of a giant corporation. Much of this conversation is revolving around companies that are going to be doing $100 million, $50 million, $1 billion of trade between, say, Africa and Canada. We need to be focusing, from my perspective, a lot of the conversation on small and medium business. If a small business wants to export to Canada, they're not going to be working with EDC or these large corporations. They need to work on a much more granular level. And that is where the Canadian government could do a much better job of helping to promote investment coming into Canada for small and medium businesses, and explaining if you really just want to set up an e-commerce website to be able to sell your product in Canada, which is what a lot of small businesses want to do around the world, here's the steps you need to take. Now, I do that with my customers because it's somewhat easy for a small company of 50 people in Indonesia to get it set up in a warehouse in Canada after they've registered. And if they're only selling an easy product like a pair of shoes, but if you're selling a complicated electronics or pharmaceutical good, it just goes up the chain and it becomes impossible. How do I get set up in Canada? The question is, good luck, I don't know. So they get a lot of support from the big companies, but these small and medium companies need much more support, I think, in the long run. And the government should be having a single place where they can go and get answers to their questions.
Anyone else want to take a shot at that first?
I'll just mention about the angle you brought up there on the women. So we know that the OWIT chapters in Africa are very engaged with big business in Africa, and for example, our Canadian high commissions and embassies in Africa, there's often exchanges, and when there's business people from Canada going to Africa where, there's an interest, we try and set up meetings with these groups, like with OWIT, Ghana or Kenya or Nigeria, whatever. So that does happen. Certainly the challenges that women entrepreneurs face in Africa are the same as what women entrepreneurs face here in Canada. Yes, financing is the issue, but I think we have to be really clear what type of financing we're talking about. It's affordable financing, it's enduring financing, it's equity. Enough with these high rate interest loans. They want patient capital and willing to accept low return on investment. That is just like a key thing for SMEs and women-owned SMEs in particular, because they do suffer from a sense of feeling discriminated against in all markets, not only in Africa or in Canada, but everywhere. And bankers have an impression that women are particularly risk averse, which is not the case. Women are willing to take risks, but bankers who are making decisions, including venture capitalists, they have this assumption, and they ask women questions like, well, how are you going to manage your family if you're traveling the world trying to build your business? So these are so inappropriate, and this is very, very common for African women and Canadian women and others. So one thing about the diaspora question that I wanted to respond to as well, certainly, huge African diaspora in Canada, and a lot of them are also foreign students that are here in Canada, and then they go back home. We certainly do need to leverage these relationships over the long term and really nurture them and get those students, who go back to Nigeria or wherever and just, link up with our Canadian High Commission and our embassies in the region and really nurture those relationships and take advantage of them. I think that needs to be done as well.
Thank you. Well, as the Fosa just prepares to
Thank
answer
you.
the question.
Very great comments and really love the question as well. I think from my perspective, I think there's a few things that I would say. One is the fact that we need to actually do a better job at organizing ourselves as a diaspora community, because even the fact that the strategy was called the Canada-Africa strategy, I mean, I get it because you can call it Canada and then all the 54 countries, but like there's even a disconnect with understanding our internal diversity as a community. And I think if we had a better framework, system, etc. that already existed to show like the Nigerian community, the Kenyan community, etc. I think that's a starting point that we need to work on as a collective. So we've been doing this African Impact Initiative. One of the programs I didn't actually mention is called the African Impact Bridge Program. So we've been providing scholarships for African students because they don't get to get eligible for Canadian OSAP programs. We've also been providing paid work placements for African immigrants. And we have a lot of data. So we've supported thousands of people. We know where they're from. We have this data and we're trying to build it out into a database, divided by countries. Because these mini clusters, same thing with the work we do back home, when we make those investments and go for those trips, it's easy because we have communities here that allow the market entry there from Kenya, from Botswana. And I think the Canadian government or as a community, we should do a better job at better defining our internal groups in terms of the countries and leveraging that even in going back or breaking those win-win outcomes, because the data is there. Like my program is just one example, but there's many other programs like that. So I think that's also something that we could do better at.
Thank you. One of the observations I'd make is what you talked about, different types of capital. And when I was at the African Development Bank, we struggled mightily to explain to foreign funding partners that there's a difference between quantity of capital and quality of capital. And we really needed to improve the quality of capital. When we look at some of those charts, if there's 100 billion in remittances going back, that's patient, long-term quality capital. 42 billion of foreign aid is always going to be subject to politics, whims, fancies, sanctions, all sorts of things, right? The oppression of, particular minorities, something. It's going to be less. So technically, there's 142 billion, but only 100 billion of that is what I'd count as quality capital. And that's one of the issues that I know women entrepreneurs, particularly in the region, were facing. The African Development Bank came up with a number of programs to try and alleviate this issue. But then, of course, we came up against other cultural biases and management biases in the region. So there was always that. I think there were some other questions. Yes. Victoria, there were two.
We spoke about, we spoke about capital, and I wanted to ask the panel if any of you have had any interaction working with the African Exim Bank. It's a private one, but it's in the Caribbean right now, working with the Caribbean. So I'm not sure with Canada if any Canadian bank or businesses are utilizing. They have a lot of good services, just saying.
I'm sorry, did you say it was called the African Exim Bank?
It's yeah.
AfriExim.
Okay. I think there was one more question on that side, Victoria.
There's two.
Oh, no.
Hello. Thank you for your presentation. I work with startups. Some of them are already working in Africa, like selling to Africa or Latin America or the US. The problem that I see besides the tariffs is the supply chain. So one of the advices that I'm giving to them is to try to open a subsidiary next to their main client and have their suppliers, locally, or a diverse portfolio of suppliers in order to avoid supply chain problems. Because right now it's not just the economics, it's all the global tension that we have with the possibility of having a war escalating even more. So I believe that it will be very important that the government help these Canadian companies contact the right suppliers and the right clients, because from my experience, they're having problems with getting the right people, right? And then that's why they get afraid. So we have to help them with that, because this is coming.
Was there one more?
Yeah.
Thank you. Sorry, I won't start up. I think my name is Fawzia Moore. I work as an independent consultant, but for years I was the trade and development advisor to both CEDA and Global Affairs. And I'm going to bore Georgina because she's heard me on this before. I think as a country, we do a very bad job of developing markets overseas, even when we have the chance to do so. And pointing up particularly to the 24 is it? African LDCs actually have duty-free, quota-free market access to Canada. And we have never really tried to help them develop that access, putting small business loans in, just letting people know that the access exists, because most don't know it exists. Helping not just governments, but the private sector get involved in taking advantage of the access. I think that as of now, the two countries that were able to do something were Lesotho and Liberia. Lesotho in garments and Liberia in plastics, I think. But there is a lot of work to be done by Canada in developing the markets that we need for ourselves. And it's time that we started to do it. Thank you.
For sure. We'll just take one last question, Victoria, I think. Eh?
Thank you for that question. My name is Fergus McLaren, and I work primarily in the travel and tourism fields, working in destination planning and management. So not strictly in the tourism, taking some to a place and developing resorts, etc., but more at the same time ensuring that there is sustainability in how you plan, manage, develop and manage these places. And certainly Africa has been one of the growing continents around the world when it comes to tourism, which was severely affected by COVID. But two things just to put in mind, and this is something that we can look at from both a touristic standpoint and also a broader trade standpoint. And that is a fact, when you start thinking about tourism, you're talking about the visitor economy. You're not just talking about airlines. You're not just talking about hotels. You're talking about who creates the food, who are the guides, who provides the local transport, who provides the training. So it's a very broad-based aspect when you look at, say, a singular field. And it leads me to my second point, which is the fact that more often than not, particularly whether it's in Asia, Latin America, or Africa, we have to start looking at things in some ways as a consortium approach, because within that sort of visitor economy context, things are linked together. We depend upon various different aspects. When we support individual Canadian companies, that's great. But at the same time, sometimes you either have to look at it from a broader web of services that can be supplied at a group level, not just from a Canadian standpoint, but sometimes from a global standpoint, where you bring in different partners, because we don't have all the knowledge, we don't have all the expertise, we certainly don't have all the money. But at the same time, we have that ability, whether in travel and tourism or in other dynamic trade fields, that we can go as a consortium. And I think this is one of the things we need to think about in terms of how we conduct our trade and how we move forward as we start to diversify. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I'll hand back to the panel.
Very quickly, just to respond to some of the comments, and then I'll pass it across. I think I love the last one especially because I think if there's a saying that we have, like if you want to go fast, go alone, and if you want to go far, go together. And I think for the Africa case specifically, I think that has to be the solution because there's been way too many silos prior to this, and I think the organization of the folks in the private sector, the folks in the public sector, I think that's going to play a huge role, especially when you look at access to markets, which is kind of the second point. One of the things we've seen success in doing on our side, there's African companies who already have the customer bases that Canadian companies need to get into. And these African companies are looking for an influx of expertise, capital, connections. So we've actually seen scenarios where we provide liquidation to our early investors by Canadian companies providing what wouldn't be that expensive to them to provide in terms of capital to merge or partner with those African companies, and then they get access to their customers. That way the Canadian company is now exporting. African companies happy because they have foreign direct investment that's helping them navigate the economic fluctuations internally, and it doesn't have to be like millions of dollars. That could be like 100,000, 200,000. So there's solutions like that as well that we've seen work in our case that provide access to African markets without needing to do too much. But I think how do we make that data more available so that the companies here that are creating products or services that are needed there and vice versa can be bridged? I think that's sort of the question to throw out to everyone because we need to do that together. But good point.
Yeah, those were all really, really good questions. I wanted to, talk about the question related to importing. I used to work at Global Affairs Canada, and one of the things we found as we studied data on women traders is that in every single case, women-owned businesses in Canada import more than they export. And that is for under every single trade agreement that Canada has in place. So that's amazing. And they do that without, the Trade Commissioner Service supports on exporting. And of course, trade is a two-way thing. I know the Trade Facilitation Office of Canada does support importing from developing countries into Canada, but I feel like not everything should fall on the shoulders of TFOC, because I think women importers in Canada, including women importers who are importing from Europe, for example, can't take advantage of TFOC because TFOC focuses on developing countries. At least that's my understanding. So it's like we're missing a big part of the trade support ecosystem here. We need support for importing. It's not a four-letter word, and this is a two-way trade deal. So we got to do better. I was even thinking maybe we need EDC to have a component related to importing. We could go to IDC, do something there. More needs to be done to support importing. And I think the other thing, I love the comment here about consortiums or coalitions. I think one thing that we could also really encourage in both directions, importing and exporting and investing, outward investment and inward investment coming into Canada, we need to look at the whole ecosystem approach here, because as investors invest abroad, they can often bring Canadian companies with them to supply, but they should also be, finding supply within the countries where they're invested. And this can grow the businesses of the smaller companies in these other countries, like in Africa, for example. But I think the key point is here that we have to utilize the success stories we have. And when we have large companies invested in other countries, Canadian companies invested in other countries, they should have some role in bringing along smaller Canadian companies, introducing them to the markets, and just sort of building, like opening doors, building their reputation and as suppliers or friends of that company. And it can be done the other way around as well. So I think there's some missed opportunities, and if we're looking for a true Team Canada approach, we need to use all the levers in both directions. And I think someone brought up the point as well, like when we do these Trade Team Canada missions, it's usually a federal-led thing. We should get the provinces, leading these Team Canada missions, and the provinces should be taking companies from all provinces, not just their home province where they're coming from. I think we really got to start thinking more innovatively and get beyond some taboos.
Well, I would like to perhaps add my 2 cents on some of the questions that's been put up by the audience. I would like to first speak perhaps about the aspect of the government support and policy and programs, and the other aspect about how to actually get the reliable leads in terms of importers, exporters, or business. So first off, I heard from the audience that we say, okay, the question is it, can the Canadian government do a better job in terms of creating better policies, better, improving red tape, creating better, paperwork or processes, whatever needs to facilitate more successful business from Canadian companies? Yes, certainly the answer is yes. But I want to put a different question, like, have Canadian companies been able to take full advantage of everything existing policy and program and support available for them to expand business from Canada? The answer is no. Right? So I want to be really fair to the government here. I'm not the government guy, but I want to be really fair, to the government, right? We have to play a part in here, right? I want to give you 2 examples. First off, we didn't talk about that today, but there was another great free trade agreement between Canada and the EU, the CETA, right? And the fact is, after 10 years or 15 years implementing CETA, there are at least 20 times more of European companies be successful in doing business in Canada through CETA than Canadian companies. And I give another example is where I talk about, if you remember my presentation about Vietnam, ASEAN, like Vietnam selling to Canada like $10 million, and the other side is like less than $1 billion from Canada to Vietnam, right? So we have to ask a question, given the same business conditions, the same government regulations, everything, how come companies from EU, from ASEAN would be more successful in doing business here than Canadian companies? So something about, we have to ask ourselves, right? What holds us back? And I hate to say this, being Canadian, but I think we tend to say, sit back, say, okay, let's wait for a government to do something better job, creating better rules and blah, blah, and then when everything's ideal, and I go to do my job. And I think a lot of you here probably familiar with the Nike brand, right? And I love one of their, trademark slogan, just do it. Just do it, right? You learn by doing, and there's so many things. You cannot just sit there and say, okay, I'm not going to do anything and just, wait until Canadian government creates something really, really great for us to really be successful. We're going to be successful together, business and government, right? We cannot rely only on government, and and business alone cannot be successful either. We have to be a partnership, right? But we can't just sit there and say, okay, I can't do this, can't do that because it's so difficult, so complicated, and so this and that. And so, like I say, ask ourselves a question: how come people can be successful from outside of Canada? Right? They're facing the same things, right? They import to Canada, they're facing the same customs rule and everything. How come they're selling more here than Canadians selling overseas, right? So that's one thing I want to talk about. Like we have to take action. I'm a firm believer of taking action, right? And you don't just say, okay, you can blame all the things you want, but the thing that have you done your job? Like we talk about that in the panel as well. Have you done your homework? Have you taken full advantage of every support? I can tell from my own experience, again, it's not ideal, but Canada has one of the best ecosystem in the world. And I can say that I've been working in many countries around the world. We have one of the best ecosystems to support companies to be successful in doing international business. But have we, all of us, actually been aware of all those things that are already available here? The answer is no, right? We talk about, we see that trade commissioner, I working very closely with trade commissioner for many years. They keep sending the message, we are here to help you guys do business internationally. How come after 50 years, 60 years, we still have to do that pitch? Right? People still, a lot of people don't know what trade commissioners is, right? Yeah. So I just, like I said, be fair to everyone. I'm not defending the government, they certainly can do a better job, but like I said, just do it, right? And then together we'll be successful.
And I can tell you
The other thing I want to talk about, again, the question about how, you ask, okay, government, can you give us, some more help to get a better, more reliable leads and that kind of thing, right? Again, to be very fair, I don't think any government in the world have the resources to do that for you. Because again, there's a part about the policy and support in terms of, governmental support, but then there's a business aspect, the operations aspect, the logistic aspect, this is our job, right? Business people, you can say, okay, government, do everything for me, right? And so again, we hear about, the trade commissioner, we hear about all the great tools like, Import Genius. We can easily find nowadays with information and AI, it's actually not very difficult to get a list of suppliers, like suppliers or customers. The question is, and again, that's something like my team come to the picture. That's why I said we work very closely with EDC or TCS, for example. We help companies to vet, to qualify those leads, right? This is the only way. You can't ask the government, no matter how great they are, I guarantee you, the American government is not doing a better job. The Australian government is not doing a better job, The UK government is not doing a better job. But they are very successful internationally because they know how they can actually get other help, support to validate the leads and to get the good, reliable potential suppliers or customers. Again, it's all about doing your own work. Don't blame the government. Take advantage of what is available and do your job. I'm sorry to say this, but as a businessman, I think we also accountable for our own success, right? So that's all I want to say. Thank you.
Sure. No? Okay. I would point out that having been based in Africa myself, I work closely with Trade Commissioner Service in Nairobi, Addis Ababa, Johannesburg, as in Pretoria. And I know that they went out of their way when Canadian companies came to town to try and introduce them to the right folks. They would reach out to those Canadians who worked in other sectors of the economy to say, we're going to meet, I don't know, a food canning company. Do you know any of their competitors? Should these people who visited meet anyone else? But it was too rare to see that level of energy. And sometimes they came up against the strangest bureaucracy internally, which meant that they had to stop at some point or something. So I think the consortium approach has a lot to be said for it. Vincent, I hear what you're saying about don't blame the government for everything, but I do think having a call center that can answer phones 24 hours a day is maybe not such a big thing to ask out of them either. So I think on that note, if only to allow all of you a chance, not only to enjoy the lovely facilities that we have here, but also to ask the panel questions more one-on-one, I think we'll bring this to an end with great regret. I know we could have stayed here considerably longer, and at 4 o'clock you'll all want to check your phones anyway. So
Has anyone heard anything?
Yeah. Yeah. And let me say one last thing. There was a question that nobody answered, but I know I'm not part of such a distinguished panel, but I should point out, I have worked with African Export-Import. I know Afri-Exim Bank extremely well. I deal with them all the time. So for what that's worth. Thank you so much to everybody. And Susan, I'll hand back to you.
Wow, what an excellent job. Thank you to our panel. I had notes. I had something to say in closing remarks. I can't. I mean, like you have answered all the questions and you have been so generous with your time. We really, really appreciate it. I want to say, with your permission, that I'm pretty sure there's some questions that have gone with people in their hearts, because I saw a couple of last-minute hands that haven't answered, and I'm offering on your behalf to receive the questions if we want to email those questions over to us, and then we can forward them to our panelists, and they can answer those. And I know, I really wanted to talk about the Africa strategy, but and I had my thing over it, but that has also been talked about. The thing that hasn't been talked about the strategy is one aspect that has come up through, and I'm gonna be just 5 minutes, and that is the part about the diaspora. I'm a strong diaspora member, and I like to put the responsibility on the diaspora. Can I please get those? Oh, they already have. Oh my goodness, what a team. Anyway, what we're doing and what I want to encourage any diaspora member to do, we need to organize ourselves, right? I'm fully Canadian, but I'm fully Ugandan. If you slap me in the middle of the night, I'll first cry out in Luganda. And then I'll say, oh my God, somebody hit me, you know? So please allow me to speak to you diaspora members, the ones that are in the room, the ones that are going to watch the YouTube after, and the ones that are streaming right now. I think I know how to do this. We are starting diaspora dialogues. In simple words, let us come together and talk to each other and respond to the strategy as one voice, right? The objective is simply that. Come together, let us, I've had it said here, everybody says Africa as if Africa is one block. We ourselves see ourselves as, I am Ugandan, I know my friends here, I know from Congo, from Zimbabwe, I have some people from Benin here, I have a couple of ambassadors in here. But we are Africans. The strategy is not going to work for all of us together, but we still have to come together. I'm big on collaboration. That is, Africa Trade Desk is collaboration. Africa Diaspora Dialogues is extremely that. We are going to have a couple of sessions around the country. We'll do one in Toronto. We'll do one in Calgary in June. We'll do one in Montreal in August. We'll do one in Vancouver in October. Folks, I'm going to copy my other friend, Susan, who said, folks, friends, let us get together. Let us organize ourselves. Let us figure out how we can break down this. When you think about trade diversification, which is what we've been talking about today, and you talk about the Africa market, and you talk about what Professor has talked about over there, you think about the opportunity and all the other things that we hear about Africa is this, Africa is that. If we ourselves, the ambassadors of Africa sitting in Canada, we do not speak as a unified group, we're going to be talking about this opportunity that is being handed to us, and I am so anxious to look at my phone and find out what is happening, and I know I can see around the room, and I know we are all wanting to do that. It is going to pass us by. And then we'll say, Africa is always left behind. I like what my brother over there said, and said, we can't blame the government for everything. The government can do, but we can do. So, Nike can pay us later. Let's just do it. So, thank you everybody for being here. I think there are multiple conversations that need to happen in this room. There are people I haven't said hi to. We have some snacks. Let us snack, it's not bread, I think there's bread. Let us break fruit and break bread together. So make a friend. We are in a sandbox. Make a friend, take cards. People know how to do the digital cards, and let's find out what the tariffs are doing to make Canada great again.
Hello, hi. Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to say a couple of words. I know I'm stopping you right in the middle of a big project of increasing trade diversification for Canada. I just wanted to say a couple of words to welcome you basically to this networking reception. My name is Elise Legault. I'm the Canada Director for the One campaign. And One is a nonpartisan global organization fighting for a more just world by demanding investments to create economic opportunities and healthier lives in Africa. So what are we doing here today? So obviously, the whole world is scrambling right now to figure out how to shelter their economies from the bomb that President Trump just threw. I have not looked at what is the latest on the tariffs. But suddenly, trade diversification is suddenly a very hot topic. And I was going to come here to tell you that I feel that every day in the media, I hear about trade diversification for Canada. And I hear about let's look to Europe, let's look to Asia, let's look to Latin America. And I was going to say, I really rarely hear about let's look at Africa. However, here today, I heard a lot about the Africa opportunity. And that is, of course, because this great event was organized by the Africa Trade Desk, who I want to thank for organizing this great event. I want to thank Victoria and Susan. I also really much prefer the real Susan than the AI one, if you don't mind. So I'm not going to tell you all the statistics I had about like Africa being the fastest growing continent in the world and the biggest source of labor force growth in the world. But just to repeat the fact that currently that in 2030, Africa as a continent will be around 25% of the world's population, and yet right now Africa is only between 1 and 2% of Canada's trade. So 1 and 2% versus 25% of the population is a big problem. So this is definitely an opportunity for Canadian businesses, but there is also another opportunity on the other side of the trade coin, which is also to support African countries and businesses also sell their products to Canada so that they can grow their own economies and develop. And that is also a way to address another bomb that was thrown by Trump in the global order a couple of weeks ago with the dismantling of USAID and the massive cuts we are seeing to foreign aid, not just in the US, but in the UK, France, and lots of other countries. So African countries will be facing big financing gaps stemming from that. And many countries will also be facing increasing tariffs from the US as well. So they will be also looking for new markets. And I think in Canada, we're also going to be looking at new places to sell our products, but also buy products. So what if, for example, in the morning, instead of drinking orange juice from Florida, we drank orange juice from Egypt or Morocco, or mango juice from Malawi? So there's really an opportunity for a win-win situation here. New markets for Africa's products in the fastest growing region in the world, and African countries getting wealthier from trade and reduce their dependency on foreign aid, chart their own development course and growth. So some say that in every crisis there is an opportunity. So what if what Trump has dubbed Liberation Day becomes a day where Canada might liberate itself from its dependency from the US, and maybe Africa will liberate itself from its dependency on foreign aid. So there might be an opportunity here. So really hoping everyone can connect and scheme together. Just want to say that at One, we're an advocacy organization. We do government relations. We meet with MPs. We lobby the government. So really looking for discussion partnerships with all of you, those who want to talk about what we can encourage the government to do to encourage trade diversification. Please come see me, myself, Neha, Mohammed, that are from the One campaign. And thank you all for being here. Thank you.